If you did wander here by mistake, please check out these videos first, and I hope you find them informative and enjoyable enough that I'll see you back here when you finish. Anyway, on to the television. In an overall sense, the first story arc of Dragon Ball was adapted very well. It really doesn't have any of the pacing problems that the Z era will, and I find its original content to be humorous and very well integrated. Part of this, though, is because Toei really didn't seem to be worrying at this point about catching up to the manga. The core storyline is adapted with a refreshing briskness, which, and I can't believe I'm saying this, almost seems reckless in retrospect. There isn't even an episode recap at all until episode 11, and even then they continue to be sporadic for a while. But you can't really blame them. They had no idea how long this series was going to last, and every comment on the subject Toriyama was making at the time seemed to imply it wouldn't be very long. And with the manga having over a year's head start on the anime, the TV series began right after Goku beat Murasaki, what reason did they have to think they'd ever catch up? So on one hand, I want to praise it for being a solid adaptation, but looking at the bigger picture, part of me wonders if maybe they'd slowed it down just a little bit more, things wouldn't have gotten so abysmal later on. Now, while I've chosen to call the first story arc The Hunt for the Dragon Balls arc, it's fairly common to see this section of the story referred to by fans as the Pilaf Saga or something along those lines. Now, if you go by the manga, it's a fairly puzzling designation. Sure, Pilaf serves as the final boss and the biggest challenge our heroes face, but he only shows up at the end and has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the hunt. However, when I was a kid and had only seen the TV version of this, the Pilaf Saga seemed like a perfectly logical choice. It's funny, you remember how I once said that on Epic Quests you can introduce villains in two ways? That one was having a series of disconnected threats germane to the specific locations, like this arc, and the other was having a central villain or villainous organization, like with the Red Ribbon Army arc. Well, the TV series actually did something of an about-face when it came to this idea. Apparently they wanted an overall villain because Pilaf and crew show up in nearly every episode of this arc. And as I mentioned before, this is where the names Shu and Mai come from. Since they were going to be such important characters, the TV staff wanted them to have names. And they and Toriyama apparently forgot that the Ninja Fox guy was already named Soba, and so these names were eventually reworked into the manga. But the Pilaf contribution is by far the biggest change to this story. Yet the TV writers didn't really change much of the established story to make it work. They still largely don't interact with the heroes at all until their originally established time. Instead, they're sort of working behind the scenes, usually one step behind whatever Goku and the others are trying to do. Looking at it while being familiar with the manga, it's pretty easy to see how careful the staff was being with this, but if you had no idea, nothing really seems out of place. In fact, I think they were very creative in merging these two concepts together. In the first episode, we see Pilaf, Shu, and Mai collect their first Dragon Ball, and Mai even takes some of Bluma's Dragon Ball exposition. Granted, that begs the question of why Pilaf would need to be told about this after he's already collected his first ball. In the second episode, Goku's quest for dinner is expanded from a one-note joke about grossing out Bluma into something we actually see. For some reason, Shu and Mai are led to believe that there's a Dragon Ball in the forest where Goku and Bluma are camping out. It turns out to be wolves, and Goku, who believes the two henchmen are there to steal his dinner, takes them out, and we get to see where Goku's dinner that night came from. A more accurate intelligence report sends Pilaf and crew to Kame House, but while Kame sending in his Dragon Ball are out meeting Goku and Bluma for the first time. There are actually some pretty good gags here, like Pilaf's people attempted lockpicking. But I don't think anyone can argue that the highlight is Pilaf pulling a switchblade on a lounging crocodile we never see again. Ultimately, Kame Sennin catches them in the act and helps them leave by knocking a hole in their boat. Interestingly, this scene means that Kame House appears in the TV series much earlier than it does in the manga. Finally, what I think is their absolute best effort at incorporating the Pilaf elements is when the gang is set up camp in the desert. Not far away, Shu and Mai have programmed a bomb they plan to stick to the bottom of Oolong's camper. However, Shu ends up sticking it to his hand by mistake after it's already activated. During the course of the night, while having to avoid Yamcha and Puar's zany antics, he managed to get it off his hand and finally put it on the trailer. The next morning, when Yamcha blows up the camera, Shu and Mai assume it was their bomb and go and check the abandoned wreckage of the Dragon Balls, only for their bomb to blow up right in their faces. This is just perfect. Their plot integrates seamlessly into what Toriyama had already written and adds an extra layer of complications to this hilarious comedy of errors scenario. Once Pilaf and company make their real appearances, though, the climax of the arc has quite a few additions. The most bizarre occurs after Pilaf gasses the gang in order to knock them out and steal their last Dragon Ball. Upon waking up, they notice that their captors failed to close the wall back on them, so they escape, and upon being discovered are thrown into a giant musical-powered pinball game complete with a huge ball that follows them all around the castle until it herds them back into their prison. Weird. Pointless. But funny. After Goku transforms, Yamcha's given a bit more of an explicit resolution to his character arc, which I liked. As they're escaping, Bulma twists her ankle and can't run away. Now she needs help, but Yamcha still can't get near her. With Oolong yelling at him to give a hand, Yamcha finally has to suck it up and carries them all to safety. Afterwards, he realizes that he touched a girl and was just fine. As for Pilaf and the others, rather than just getting knocked out of the sky as they try to get away, the TV series makes them more responsible for their own defeat. They actually manage to get away until Pilaf finds himself overcome with rage over the loss of his castle and insists they turn around and attack the monster. They even manage to knock him out with a missile. But even that's not enough, so they land the plane and Pilaf actually starts kicking and jumping on him, which wakes Goku up. And it's only when they try to escape again that the monster Goku smacks them around. But even then, Pilaf doesn't give up. Once Goku is subdued, he tries to convince Shu and Mai that what they really need to do is take up pistols and pick them all off. When Pilaf shows he's not willing to join them himself, that's when they run off for good. As for that subduing of Goku, the stakes are raised quite a bit. Goku actually holds Bulma in his hand and tries to eat her. The device would later be reused with Lunch in the second movie, and rather than just Yamcha grabbing the tail, it requires the combined powers of Yamcha, Oolong, and Puar to pacify Goku. Perhaps surprisingly, a few of the more comic book-like fourth wall-breaking elements of the first arc were removed from the TV series. When Goku gets his classic hit in on Yamcha, Yamcha obviously does not break the panel since there is no panel. He just smashes into some rocks. Not nearly as memorable in my opinion. When Mai makes her balls joke, Pilaf does not go into a tirade about how this manga is different from Dr. Slump. Instead, he simply says he hates crude jokes. And there's certainly no poop on a stick this time around. Yet for some reason the Toriyama robot at the beach is retained and he still references Penguin Village. And finally, there are just a couple of miscellaneous things that interest me. There's a minor but very odd change. The sunglasses-wearing rabbit they encounter is known as Toninjinka in the manga, but for some reason in the anime his name is changed to Usagi Ninjinka. They both mean the same thing, but it's surprising that such a misreading of the original Furigana occurred. Also, if you happen to enjoy all those bare-breasted shots of Bulma in the manga, you find the TV series doesn't quite provide the same underage experience, as it usually finds ways to obscure her chest butt. That said, her butt is apparently considered just fine. And in that same scene, Bulma's humming the ending credits song. Since we're on the subject of the adaptation of Dragon Ball, there are other production-related topics that a manga simply does not possess. And I'd like to briefly touch on a few of them as we go along. So in this installment, I'll begin by mentioning some of the differing animation studios that handle Dragon Ball. It should go without saying that the artwork in the TV version is not Toriyama's, and that there are a ton more drawings to crank out in a piece of animation than in a comic. To that end, Dragon Ball began with 6 main animation teams, each taking turns from episode to episode. I admit that animation isn't exactly my specialty. You should talk to my friend Jacob YBM for a really in-depth discussion on the matter, but since I collected the Z Dragon boxes and watched everything through with an adult eye, I began to recognize the different art styles and form my own opinions on them. First I'll mention is Studio Junio, supervised by Maeda Minoru, the chief animator and character designer for the series. As such, his work is usually some of the highest quality, and his episodes are among my favorites. It's highly detailed throughout, and heavily resembles Toriyama's artwork. I do think there are some points during the 23rd Budokai where his work starts to suffer. In particular, his shading only starts to look rough around that point. But once Z rolled around, he was really back on his A game. Sadly, around the Frieza arc, his episodes became rarer and rarer, presumably because he was so busy with all the Z movies that were being cranked out. During the Cell arc, though, he left Dragon Ball, leaving even more episodes to be covered by our next studio. When I was first introduced to Last House, I considered it to be Maeda Light. I like Last House's work at this point in the series a lot. It's not nearly as detailed as Studio Junio, but there's a cute roundness to it that, when it's at its best, endears itself to me. Uchiyama Masayuki supervised, and as the series went on, he had to take on more and more duties himself, and we'll be stopping in from time to time to see just how Last House progresses. Well, I feel I've gone on long enough, so yes, that's the first story arc of Dragon Ball redone for television. There's definitely some fluff here, but it's well done fluff. None of it is really bad, and some of it does manage to help the story. Toei's Dragon Ball is off to a good start. But moving right along, next time we'll take a look at the second television arc as we revisit the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. See you there! I made sure to breathe. In creating my TV supplement for the last arc, I found myself particularly plagued with what reviewer SF Debris once dubbed "you forgotism," a condition wherein a little voice in my head would say, if you don't put it in the review, people will think you forgot. That's why I made sure to include screen caps of various filler segments I didn't talk about, such as the fight with the Ox Demon King and Puar transforming into the Keratizer Bunny, because, let's face it, there's a lot I'm not going to cover. I just can't. Pretty much every episode has some kind of alteration, be it added scenes, deleted scenes, a different order of scenes, and this format just does not lend itself to detailing in such scrutiny. Plus, like all of you, I really want to move forward to the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc. If I go into everything about every episode and talk about music and animation and voices, then I'm going to be stuck here for years. So in a way, that makes this a much more selective and arbitrary look than my main Dragon Ball dissection videos, because it's only going to be about things that particularly interested me, or that I found to be especially significant to the manga storyline. That said, the reason I bring this up is because I actually did forget something I wanted to talk about last time. It's a minor thing, but it interested me because prior to this viewing in preparation for this sub-series, despite the fact that reading the manga has for years been my primary form of digesting Dragon Ball, it's something I never realized was filler. The TV series, at least in the first arc, decided that a Dragon Ball, when in close proximity to other Dragon Balls, glows. It's made a pretty big deal at first, but it's fairly quickly dropped, which makes the whole thing feel inconsistent. Moving right along, the TV series began the second story arc on May 28, 1986, right as Kuririn is fighting General Blue in the manga. As for its first bit of filler, they start off with what I assume was intended to be some kind of running gag, as Yamcha's plane crashes before they're able to make it back home. As they're stranded in the jungle, a figure blows past them. As we'll soon find out, it's Kuririn on his way to Kame House, whose introduction is handled with various shots like these, including a glimpse at how he finds the rowboat we first see him in the manga. Funnily enough, that means his introduction in the second movie is actually closer to his manga roots than the actual adaptation is. Likewise, Lunch is given a completely new introduction. Her good form enters a saloon in a Wild West-type town, and the leader of a group of bounty hunters tries to hit on her. Then she sneezes and they recognize her from her wanted poster. They try to take her in, but she just shoots the place up and leaves. Then she uses a rocket launcher to derail and rob a train, which leads into the police chase that serves as her original introduction. Incidentally, this means that her good form is what we first see in the TV series, as opposed to her bad form, which is what we're introduced to in the manga. Also weird is that her wanted poster lists her reward in dollars, when this is far past the point where the concept of zenny has been introduced in the manga. And finally, I just love that player piano music that's used in the saloon. During all the training parts, Kame Sennin trying to do naughty things with Lunch while Lunch remains oblivious seems to be an easy go-to for filler. However, aside from that, we get to see Yamcha training for the Budokai too. He beats up an entire dojo, including this really big guy, which is impressive. However, when you see the occupants cowering in fear, most of them appear to be children, which is a little less impressive. Bluma and the others begin their filler shtick for this arc by peeping in through the window. Later during the prelims, they try the same thing, as the anime makes it abundantly clear that only participants can enter the gymnasium. Remember that point for later. Actually, Bluma tries the same thing by forcing Oolong to hold her up. Oolong and a huge crowd try to look up Bluma's skirt, but when Kuririn throws his monk bully through the wall, that gives them a safer vantage point from which to watch. And hey, score a point for taking an element from the manga and integrating it into their filler. But as these scenes indicate, Bluma abusing Oolong is a common source for filler material throughout the first series. There's also an early bird cameo by Bacterian. Wow, can this arc introduce any character when they're supposed to be introduced? Apparently Yamcha isn't satisfied with beating up kids who remind him of Goku, so he goes to train in the woods by himself and grows a beard. Or, well, stubble. But apparently this serves as Bluma's inspiration for convincing Yamcha to cut his hair. Also as an aside, all this time spent with Bluma and the others means we first see the Western Metropolis much earlier in the anime than in the manga. Now, I'm of two minds about these Yamcha scenes. On one hand, I think they do what filler does best by expanding upon points mentioned in the story. The writers are seizing upon ideas Toriyama already created and are bringing them to life, so I find them very interesting to watch. On the other hand though, from a pure storytelling perspective, they are not only pretty pointless, but they also ruin the surprise of Goku bumping into his friends at the tournament. We already know Yamcha's training for it and is going to be there. At this point in the manga, the story was still very new. For all we knew, we would never see Bluma and the others again. But I've always thought that for its original audience, most of them would have already read the manga anyway, and if I wanted the exact storyline of the manga, I'd just read the freaking manga. I find the anime interesting because it's different, so I don't know. But that said, I guess the TV series realized that and just decided to wipe out any remaining trace of surprise, because they decided to have Goku meet everyone the moment they arrived to register instead of having him bump into Yamcha near the end of the preliminaries. That also leads to the fact that the TV series treats the major tournaments in a very different manner. In the manga, they're always on a single day. They arrive, register, fight, and finish without any interruptions. In the TV versions, they always arrive the night before to register, stay at a hotel, and then start fighting the next day. There are certainly variations which we'll get to. Aside from the fact that they move all those Yamcha and company scenes earlier, this one is relatively unchanged, and the hotel scene is just a shot of the two boys and their master sleeping. I guess Kame Sennin has more funds later, since in future tournaments they don't have to share a bed. The next day the boys get their uniforms, which means I have to talk about colors for a moment. With some exceptions, Dragon Ball was largely a black and white experience, and yes, I know they recently released a full color version of the manga. The TV version was, of course, in full color from the get-go. As such, there are lots of different color discrepancies between the two. For example, in the manga, Bluma has purple hair. In the TV series, she has blue hair, and that's probably because Toriyama drew her with blue hair in the first chapter. And that's part of why I'm not going to spend much time on coloring issues. Toriyama himself is woefully inconsistent with his own coloring, so it's hard to fault the anime for not being entirely consistent with him. More importantly for me, I'm colorblind, which makes any in-depth nitpicking on my part nearly impossible. Chances are I've never even noticed most of them. However, in this case, the Kame Dogi is fairly iconic, and Toriyama pretty consistently colors it with a bright orange. Hell, I've seen a lot of translations refer to it as a yellow, which just confuses me, but again, colorblind. And that's obviously not counting the limited color red and grayscale chapters. But maybe they were counting that, since the TV series presents the uniforms as a very reddish orange. The kanji is in a yellow circle instead of white, and the belts are black instead of blue. I don't mind this choice, I prefer the orange. I do find it weird that they don't match the belts to the wrist guards and shoes though. That's just a terrible fashion faux pas. One more color thing is that Kuririn is pretty well known in the TV series for having eyes that aren't colored. That is, they're the same color as the rest of his face. In the manga, however, he has white eyes just like everyone else. And for his first several episodes in the TV series, it's the same way. It's only a little ways into the finals that he inexplicably loses this trait. This is somewhat off point, but I will say that the finals of this tournament are very, very nostalgic for me. Once I got into the Japanese version, these episodes were among the first fan sub tapes I got during the summer of 2000. Technically, they weren't fan subs at all, but home recordings of a subtitled version that aired in Hawaii many years ago. But they were the first episodes of the original series I ever saw in Japanese, and I spent that summer peddling them to all my friends' houses. As such, I love these episodes very dearly, and it was nice to finally see them in DVD quality this year for the first time. When I first watched these episodes, though, something I always found odd was the announcer's claim that Kuririn was going to lose without having landed a single blow, even though I'd clearly seen Kuririn whack Bacterian in the face earlier. Well, after I read the manga where he doesn't hit him until the end, this made sense. See, this is an example of bad filler. They expanded the fight a little bit, but then neglected to alter the manga line. That said, they do fix the inconsistency with Kuririn's number in the manga. There he draws 1, but is afterwards shown in the second spot. Here he draws 2 from the outset. Also, for some reason, when Kuririn delivers his match-winning fart, he actually pulls down his pants in the animated version. My favorite bit of filler in this section, though, is when Goku's and Giron's fight is interrupted by a sudden rainstorm. They take refuge in a bar, and that same awesome piano piece is playing again. Sadly, I think this is its last appearance, but I guess it's hard to get a lot of mileage out of it. After all, how many people play piano in this show? But as the gang regroups, Yamcha warns Goku about how fearsome Giron is because, you know, expositing is what Yamcha does. Then there's a typical bar scene done in hilarious Dragon Ball style where Giron comes in hat and trench coat no less, and orders milk only to be made fun of by the monks. Are all these Orient monks terrible people? Anyway, Giron beats all of them up so we can see how tough he is. Both Yamcha and Goku intervene, and apparently Giron finds Yamcha to be such a goody-goody that just being around him makes Giron itch. But before Goku and Giron can go at it, Jackie steps in to say that fighting outside of the tournament is grounds for disqualification, another anime-only rule. But I find this a lot of fun. It's a good setup for Giron, it's nice to see the characters together, and it's just good atmosphere. Around this time, the series starts using a custom title card animation for tournament episodes, although in this first tournament, it's very inconsistent. In some episodes it'll be there, and others it'll be gone. For the other main tournaments in the series, they'll use it for every episode. As I said when I covered this arc before, the Kyoken section of the Goku-Jackie fight is cut out, although I stand by what I said then. I think it could have easily worked outside of a text-based medium. Whatever. There's a cute little bit where Jackie slips up and almost gives away his identity. In order to protect it, he pulls out a scroll that justifies what he said by showing that he and the Muten Roshi are actually related. Still, that's a very specific mistake to have prepared for. Now, in essentially every episode of every Dragon Ball series, there's a preview for the next episode, and in it, we're almost always greeted by what has become Goku's animated catchphrase. Os, ora Goku! Or, hey, this is Goku. Well, when Jackie fires his massive Kamehameha to stop the transformed Goku, the episode ends on the cliffhanger that Goku is dead. While the images contained within show that Goku is indeed still alive, in a very nice touch they have Bluma open the preview instead. As far as I know, this is the only time outside of Dragon Ball Kai that another character handles the preview. Even in parts of the series where Goku is actually dead, he still does the preview. Finally, a filler section leading to the end of the fight contains Dragon Ball's first insert song, Nezaze Tenkaichi, which you heard at the beginning of this video. I love this song and I love that scene. The next arc is going to go crazy with the idea of insert songs, though. Also, in regards to the final part of this fight scene, it's something I don't know if I can really give the TV series full credit for because it's mentioned in the manga and kinda shown too, but the TV series really brings this sunset effect breathtakingly to life. It makes an already good fight that much more dramatic. The set pieces of the sunset and the Tenkaichi battle arena just make this fight look so distinctive, a distinctiveness that unfortunately later battles in the series would lack. I will say though that the transition wasn't exactly handled smoothly. In one shot, Jackie gets knocked down and it's broad daylight. Oh hey, suddenly the sky's a totally different color. To continue our look at the animation teams, episode 14 marked the introduction of the last of what I consider the original 6, Aoshima Katsumi, who as far as I can tell didn't have a studio and was just a freelance animation supervisor. He had worked as a key animator under Maeda Minoru in episode 8 before taking this role. Despite his apparent lack of an official studio, I think his work might be my favorite of all. It always looks good, it animates well, it's very distinct. You'll probably hear me mention eyes a lot, but it's always the eyes that are the first thing that allows me to distinguish an animation studio. Aoshima's character's eyes just have a sharpness to them that looks really good, yet it doesn't feel overly angular like some of Toriyama's later drawings. Switching gears completely though, Studio Live is by far my least favorite animation studio of the bunch. It was primarily overseen by Ebisawa Yukio, but most fans I've encountered know it as Triangle Guy. And that's because all of Studio Live's work is just pointy. For example, characters have extremely long heads that end in very pointy chins, and it even animates poorly. Now, I took martial arts for 9 years when I was a kid, and one of the first things I learned was to always pivot your base foot while kicking, otherwise any attempt to lift your leg that high will result in injury. There are so many times watching Studio Live episodes that I am in pain when I watch the characters kick. The body was not designed to move that way. Yeesh. Even so, on occasion the studio churned out some decent work, and in especially cartoon scenarios their style is somewhat charming. All of Dragon Ball's cast is great, and most of them were already revered veterans of the industry when they started. Furuya Toru was already famous as the voice of Amuro Ray from the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and apparently didn't even have to audition when he was cast as Yamcha. Tsuru Hiromi brings such a wonderful range to Bluma, which is especially good at this point in the series. She is fairly shrewish, and while Tsuru captures that, she also provides a warmth and sweetness that keeps her from being unlikable. The late Miyauchi Kohei is similar in his abilities to effortlessly switch between perverted sleaze and venerable teacher. I could go on about every single voice, but there's really only so much I can say beyond they're great. But I do find it interesting how this arc utilizes two Dr. Slump actors as major players. Koyama Mami, the voice of Arale, was brought back to portray Lunch, and Utsumi Kenji, Senbei, who had already portrayed Shenlong, now goes in a totally different direction for the tournament announcer, a performance I've always adored. He would pick up various roles over the next several years, including Commander Red and Riku. Sadly, he didn't stick around through all of Zeus. When the announcer comes back years later in the Buu arc, it's no longer him. Finally, episode recaps start becoming the norm here during the finals. They actually do some pretty creative things here, like overlaying the bracket over the footage and crossing out the character portraits we see earlier, and some of it required some effort to edit and isolate footage, so it's not yet just an easy way to pad out an episode. So that's my take on the TV version of the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc. Next time we'll move on to the Red Ribbon Army arc. See you there! Yes, I'm already having to split these into two parts. The Red Ribbon Army arc is a long one, particularly in anime form, and it has tons of interesting fillers, so I'm not going to waste any time with pleasantries, but rather just dive right in. The TV version of the Red Ribbon Army arc began on September 10th, 1986, just as Goku was in his second fight with Tao Pai Pai in the manga. This arc begins with a first for Dragon Ball, an episode that is completely filler. And in true sitcom fashion, this has an A plot and a B plot. I'll go ahead and start with the B. Just like at the introduction of the last arc, Yamcha's car breaks down and the four spend the episode stranded in the desert until a sandstorm, related to the A plot, blows them right back to where they started. Although in this case the scenario was alluded to in the manga version, which had already been out long before the previous breakdown plot had occurred in the TV series. Unlike in the manga, Kuririn and Kame-Senni are left to their own devices. Also, rather than parting company the night of the tournament, they wait until the next day here. At any rate, if they did think this would be a running gag, it never happens again, so we just have these two very similar instances of woe. As for the A plot, Namu's once again in trouble. Even though it's only the next day, the water he got at the tournament is already running out, and the village elder thinks there's something wrong with the river. With the help of Goku, they find the river has been dammed by a whole Giron clan with their Guru Guru Gum. Well, Goku's no stranger to breaking that stuff down, so he does, and water again flows freely. Until the aforementioned sandstorm hits. It's only then they find a mystical and previously mentioned roaming lake to save them all. While it's nice to see some B-tier characters again, although we barely had time to miss them, Giron being the leader of a clan does seemingly contradict what we later see of him when he gets killed in the Piccolo arc. There he's just some unliked bully. Although I suppose you could say that his failure to save the dam got him booted out of office perhaps, and he'd fallen on hard times? After this episode, the Red Ribbon plot begins in earnest, but with several more filler episodes. These primarily serve to build up Colonel Silver and work in as many other characters as possible. After a greedy businessman tries tricking them with a fake, Goku, Pilaf, and Silver get in a three-way chase for the real one until the bird carrying it is eaten by a dinosaur that's taken down by the Ox Demon King. He's holding a wedding feast because Chi-Chi believes Goku's coming back to marry her right then. Pilaf tracks the Dragon Ball there, and they repeat the getting Goku's name wrong joke from the manga. If you remember when I covered that originally, you'll know I was less than amused by it. But for some reason it just cracks me up when Pilaf reads aloud, "Welcome, Mago Gosara?" Maybe it's Chiba Shigeru's delivery, but I love it. Anyway, the disguised Shu is Goku, hijinks ensue, the army attacks, Goku pees on a camera, Pilaf is defeated, Chi-Chi gets a taste of the years of disappointment she'll have to endure, then there's a plot with monkeys and Silver burning down their forest, the Dragon Ball falls into a river, and it finally washes up into the source material. Now, this is funny and stupid fluff, I enjoy it, but I hate what they do with Silver's character here. To me, it just totally ruins him. The TV series doth protest too much. His face is in shadow, he's feared, he kills his enemies, he beats up his comrades. Silver is built up into the absolute biggest badass over the span of several episodes, thwarting Goku at every turn, and as a result, that sense of enemy progression that I praised is gone here. Originally, he's just some low-level thug employing a couple of local yokels to search for a Dragon Ball. Here he has hundreds of troops and tanks and artillery. He rivals the forces of General Blue, and General White absolutely pales in comparison. Then, once we land in the source material, all those troops are gone and Goku still manages to take him down instantly. Talk about a letdown. So, fun on their own, not too good for the story as a whole. There's not too much to say about the Muscle Tower section. It mostly expanded itself by filling in stuff the manga glossed over. As I said before, the girl from Jingle Village was given a name, Snow, and a lot of the filler material is cutting away to scenes of her worrying about Goku. In a nice touch, time passes in the TV version while Goku is scaling the tower, so the climax occurs at night rather than during the day. something that always seemed like a weird missed opportunity was the maze floor. Hachan leads Goku through it. The end. The TV series actually builds an adventure into that. The secret is its movable walls, so General White is able to keep them from finding the exit. It's only when they split up that they uncover the deception. When the day is saved, Hachan actually knocks down Muscle Tower, which is cool, but nothing's as cool as big, glaring continuity issues, which brings us to Dr. Frappe. I like this, actually. I talked originally about how Hachan lives in Jingle Village as deadly internal explosive apparently forgotten. Well, the TV series did not forget. Hachan refuses to live with them for that reason, so they recommend going to see Dr. Frappe, a reclusive old scientist who has a soft spot for snow. However, Murasaki has survived and sets out to fail at stopping them as only he can. It's revealed that Dr. Frappe had been forced by the army to build Hachan in the first place, and Murasaki makes him steal Goku's Dragon Ball. I don't know why Frappe is apparently more suited to this than, I don't know, the ninja? It all works out in the end, and Goku retrieves his lunch, since he wisely left the Dragon Balls with Snow's parents. And of course, the good doctor removes the bomb. It's extraordinarily silly and stupid, but I love it. I don't even care that years later Toriyama is going to build an entire storyline around Hachan's creator and it has nothing to do with this Dr. Frappe guy. But needless to say, Dr. Frappe is quietly swept under the rug after this. Funnily enough, they get Yanami Joji, the series narrator, to voice Dr. Frappe, a brilliant scientist and inventor, immediately before Goku meets Dr. Brief, a brilliant scientist and inventor for whom they also cast Yanami Joji. Or who knows, maybe that's why they cast him as Dr. Brief. This section is expanded a bit. The two thugs who tried to mug Goku actually work for a master thief named Husky, who was contracted by the army to steal Goku's Dragon Balls. Meanwhile, Bluma decides to give Goku a tour of the city, but they end up running into Yamcha and the others who Bluma does not want to see, but is successfully disguised from by her microband. Now, it is absolutely clear that the TV version is siding with Yamcha in this fight and believes that Bluma is overreacting. When Goku arrives, Oolong and Puar are both telling the sad sack how spoiled and selfish Bluma is, and how he can do better than her. When he reluctantly agrees that she has some personality issues, she grows to normal size and blames him. And only him. They end up going to an amusement park in the sky, trailed by the thieves, but there's no kill like overkill, so of course someone who is a master stealth thief has also set up a bomb to blow up the entire park, because that makes perfect sense. Yamcha sends Goku to take care of the bomb, while Husky preys upon his fear of women to try and get the Dragon Balls from him. Who should wander by but Bluma, who of course blames and attacks Yamcha. Goku gets the remote and of course destroying a bomb's remote control deactivates the bomb. You know, just like how if your TV remote breaks, your TV stops working. Of course, going by that logic, they didn't need to go visit Dr. Frappe about Hachan's bomb at all because Goku destroyed that remote too. So because of the Husky incident, Yamcha's once again physically assaulted by his insanely jealous girlfriend who hates cheaters so much, she runs off without him to go drool over General Blue. Yamcha, listen to me very carefully. Run. Run far, far away, you poor dolt. Still, it's nice getting to see the original five together one last time. But when Yamcha's flying the others to the Red Ribbon HQ, he and Bluma actually briefly address their fight. Granted, it's really just for Bluma to tell him how she hasn't forgiven him, but I do like that they agree to act professionally due to the mission at hand. Of course, after this scene, it's still never brought up again or resolved, but I guess that's better than nothing. Once Kame Sennin gets the microband, he tries in vain to use it on Lunch. I always found it interesting in the manga how Lunch started out completely violent to everyone around her, but then suddenly started tolerating them. Well, the TV version includes a scene that begins that shift. In another one of Muten Roshi's attempts to get somewhere with her, Lunch sneezes into her evil form and attacks, but then she realizes that she's seen this guy in this place a lot, and wonders if they're actually friends. In order to test this theory, Lunch makes him do everything for her until the sea turtle sneaks in with a branch to tickle her nose and sneeze her back into docility. So not only does this segment explain how she starts acclimating to these people, but it also foreshadows the eventual raid on Kame House. Speaking of which, the leader of B-Squad is given the name Doc, and manages to go through 2 voices in his short tenure. A few expansions in the Pirates section include Bluma and Kuririn being chased by the robot, there being multiple trapped treasure chests, and Bluma's panties. If they didn't change enough in the manga, there's a filler scene in the pirate cave that gets our heroes in hot lava, showing that Bluma is wearing strawberry print panties just before she strips down to swim, and they change again. The only other thing that caught my interest with the pirate cave is that they make it so the Dragon Ball is found in the mouth of a pirate skull. Now, that makes no sense. I can buy that the Dragon Ball ended up in this pirate cave due to that small fissure above. But did they forget it's not pirate treasure? It's only been in the wild for 8 months. There's no way it's gonna be in a decomposed pirate's mouth! The Dr. Slump crossover is one of the few instances in Dragon Ball where the plot is largely rewritten from scratch. The TV series expands the crossover so that more of the Dr. Slump characters have roles and interactions with Blue or Goku, rather than the cameos they had in the manga. That means the manga's opening scene is pretty much scrapped. The biggest subplot involves Taro and the Penguin Village police unsuccessfully trying to apprehend Blue. The most memorable scene is between Blue and Obacha Man, where we learn that not only is Blue gay, he's also a pedophile. Ahem. But because of these added plots, it seems like it takes Goku forever to even think to check the Dragon Radar. They do add a trippy effect to look like they're passing into another reality when they enter, and in a nice touch, they do use bits of the Dr. Slump musical score in these episodes. I like that the TV version gives more than just the Norimaki family a chance to shine, but you can't beat the manga's fake-out intro. But it is so rare to see something change so significantly. I think both versions are worth checking out. Upa and Bora are, naturally, given an introduction before their original appearance. We get to see more of their lifestyle and the boy's admiration of his father, which strengthens the impact of Bora's death. Apparently, Karting Tower is near a volcano in this continuity, and the Dragon Ball is near it, until the volcano erupts and propels the ball to where Upa and Bora are. Around this point, the series gets a slew of new music, one of which is a really tender, touching piece for Upa and Bora. Honestly, it's probably used far too often around this point, but it's hard to blame them. Most powerfully, it's used for Bora's death and Goku's resultant rage. It serves as a wonderfully painful counterpoint to the events. It's just so nice to listen to. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, and there's a little boingy sound. Okay, I guess it's going for a bit of that spaghetti western feel, makes sense. And there it is again. And again. It's on every beat. Stop it, Kikuchi, you're ruining the song! Stop! I hate that I'm saying this. For years, I've defended Kikuchi's tracks against people who criticize it for its use of that boingy instrument, which is a Jew's harp, and the vibro slap, which is that rattling sound. But this is the first time I've ever found it distracting. I wouldn't have minded it there at all, it's just towards the end when it punctuates every beat, nearly every note, that it becomes overpowering. It almost ruins this amazing song for me, and the fact that it does drives me crazy. Moving on though, when Goku climbs Karting Tower, he finds a bunch of pots, some of them containing visions of the past, present, and future. There are some weird things like Dragon Ball Bowling. It's not just for the end credits anymore. Now, the future one is interesting to me due to the fact that the TV series was in a position to accurately predict the future by just looking at the manga. And so it does foreshadow his eventual meeting with Uranai Baba, which I thought was a pretty clever thing to do. But since the manga by this point was already well into the 22nd Budokai, I thought it would have been cool to include some images of Tenshinhan and Chaozu. But maybe that's a bit too off point for this arc and just treading a bit into fan service. When Goku has his rematch with Pai Pai and the assassin gets in over his head, he decides to climb Karting Tower and get powered up as well. Karting tricks him into thinking he's gotten stronger and then gives him his own Black Kinto that ultimately drops him right into the ground. I do find it interesting that the TV series has Karting giving away a Kinto long before Toriyama establishes the cloud as his. But while this is amusing, I really hate this. It absolutely kills the pacing of this fight. I mean, Tao Pai Pai just runs away. He's gone for a very long time. Hell, Goku and Upa go to sleep while he's gone. It's just ridiculous. It kills the tone, too. This isn't just some comedic fight. This is Goku avenging a man who was brutally murdered, and they're just going to take this goofy extended time out? Now, I don't mind serious fights cutting away to comedic B-plots. I do mind when the serious fight itself completely switches genres. But yeah, Tao Pai Pai lands, and the fight resumes as if nothing had ever happened. Because it shouldn't have. Interestingly, Red puts a tracker on Tao Pai Pai so they know that he's died rather than being surprised by it like in the manga. Except that by the next episode, they've forgotten about it, so the scenes play identically anyway. Nice job. While Goku is storming the headquarters is a subplot with Colonel Violet. She appeared for all of one page in the manga, having found a Dragon Ball with the stolen radar, but here she's given more to do. Specifically, as the base is in disarray, she betrays Red and wipes out his personal vault. Black's betrayal of Red has given a bit more of a personal vendetta. Red flees to safety and leaves Black to deal with Goku, only to try and destroy the room they're in when they're both in it. So when Red reveals his true motives, Black is already pretty annoyed. There's a weird scene during the Uranai Baba section where she lures Goku away into a room, feeds him a lot, and then tries to recruit him, and then nothing ever comes of it, and it's never mentioned again. For Yamcha's fight against Mummy-kun, he keeps going for quite a bit longer. There's a very touching moment when Puar, in tears, flies into the arena and tries to fight him off to no avail. But unlike in the manga, Yamcha never gives up. It takes Mira-kun actually throwing Yamcha to his death in the acid below to end the fight. Goku takes out his Noibo to stop Yamcha mid-fall, at which point he's disqualified. I don't know if one's really better than the other, but I appreciate what they were trying to do. So, remember all that time I spent talking about the inconsistencies between the sack and the backpack? Well, apparently the TV staff noticed some of it too because, hey look, they remembered the backpack! And just in my own defense, most of this Red Ribbon TV stuff I only saw for the first time this year. I was not setting up that pin to knock it down here. There's an added scene while Goku is taking Upa back to Bora's grave wherein Yamcha asks the Muten Roshi if he can become his disciple, but the old man turns him down, saying that with 2 pupils his hands are already too full. Buluma comes to her boyfriend's defense and balks at this, then employs strategy, mentioning how much time she would have spent with them lounging at the beach. At this, the Muten Roshi accepts Yamcha as his pupil. This is very interesting to me in a lot of ways. One, it's so nice to see Buluma stand up for Yamcha, especially after the way she'd acted earlier. It's even a slightly poignant twist. She's used to using her body and sexuality to fulfill her own selfish desires, but now she's using that to help someone she cares about instead. Also, while it's never outright stated, it seems to me this scene is actually being used to justify the Muten Roshi sending Goku away on his training journey. I mean, think about it. He says that 3 pupils would be too many, he accepts Yamcha, and then he immediately sends Goku away for 3 years. Just think about that the next time the Muten Roshi gives a speech about seeing the world and blazing a trail. I will say, though, that the whole thing makes Yamcha's acceptance feel a little less special. Granted, it's never spelled out in the manga, but when Yamcha tells Goku he's going to be trained, it always came across to me as though the Muten Roshi had offered to train him after being impressed with Yamcha's leadership and fighting skills he had just witnessed, similar to how he offered to train Goku after seeing his Kamehameha. Here he only trains Yamcha because of his girlfriend, which, well, I guess is technically in step with the other pupils too. Think of it what you will. During the 3-year gap, we do get to see some of that training, which is nice considering how much time Kuririn and Yamcha are implied to have spent together. It's fun seeing Yamcha with the turtle shell on his back, and even Puar gets involved with the training a bit. But then in one episode, they're training on the Big Island, another episode they're back at Kame House, and it's all very inconsistent. We get to see Goku's journeys as well, and these are all pretty fun. They have that good fantasy martial arts vibe that I so love about early Dragon Ball. Goku has to stop 2 brothers who are terrorizing the town with their magic imprisoned in Gord, which is actually based on a Journey to the West story. He helps the father and son defend their dojo. He journeys into the Demon Realm to rescue a princess, and this is years before Toriyama incorporates a Demon Realm into his own story. And he and Uranai Baba help out an unscrupulous fox kid who just wants a friend. Most importantly of all, though, is the anime's unceasing desire to introduce characters before they're introduced, so we get to meet Ten Shinhan and Chaozu during the 3-year gap. The TV series had already introduced a young version of the Muten Roshi, which is totally different from what we see in the Piccolo arc. Now they introduce a young Tsuru Sennin before the present one even shows up, when the Muten Roshi and Buluma are going through his photo album and come across a picture of them and a pet they raised, the Enoshikacho. Sure enough, Ten Shinhan and Chaozu have the pet, all grown up, and are using it to terrorize villages only to sell their services in removing the beast. Goku tries to stop them but is attacked by some easily tricked and quick-to-riot villagers. But when push comes to shove, the Crane kids betray their pet while Goku stands up for it, and it's actually kinda sad. How come they never have to answer for the Enoshikacho, huh? Huh? Poor guy. Anyway, I know I said I wouldn't pick on the dub, but this is still fresh in my mind. I found myself very curious what Funimation would name this creature because Enoshikacho was very complex for an American tongue. To my utter shock, they kept the name intact. However, they pronounced it like only a Texan dubbing studio could. Hey guys, take a look at my Enoshikacho! Yeesh. Now it's time to take a look at the 2 main villains of this arc. Just like with Silver, Commander Red's face is not seen in his early appearances. Unlike with Silver, this actually makes sense since Red is a shadowy, far-off threat. Also, like the best Bond villains, Red is given a pet to menacingly stroke. In this case, it's some kind of vicious wombat thing. As for Black, in the manga he went by Buraku Hosa, which means Adjutant Black. In the TV series, they decided to go for a bit of a play on words by changing his title to Staff Officer, which resulted in his full designation being Black Sanbo. Black Sanbo. I'll just let that one speak for itself. Early on in the arc, the Dragon Balls themselves get a bit of a confusing backstory. Kame Sennin attempts to explain to Kuririn in Lunch where the Dragon Balls come from, and according to him, they were once one single ball worshipped by the people until they began to fight amongst themselves over it, causing the gods to punish them by splitting it into 7 and scattering them across the world. Now, obviously this does not match at all with the history of the Dragon Balls we just saw we'll eventually get in the Piccolo arc, so this is often decried as another anime-induced plot hole. I suppose it's possible they assumed Toriyama would never reveal where the Dragon Balls come from and thought they had free reign to do what they wanted, only to later be proven wrong. But then again, this is presented as a legend, not first-hand knowledge, so there's nothing saying it has to be true. A rationalization or their actual intent. I guess we'll never know. Finally, there are a lot of insert songs in this arc. All of a sudden the show just explodes with them. General Blue gets the Red Ribbon Army song I use in the intro. There's a good one called With a Burning Heart Defeat the Red Ribbon Army when Goku is heading to the base that serves as an extended flashback to the rest of the arc. It's padding, but it's really cool and it effectively builds excitement for the siege. And Goku himself even gets to sing one as he's heading toward the Western Metropolis. Then there's the awesome 80s pop ballad of Blue Travelers as Goku and Upa head to revive Bora. It really hits you in the feels. And those aren't even all the examples. Due to the length of this arc, I'm going to forego looking at voices or animation studios and just sum up here. During my original review of this arc, I suggested that people who didn't like the arc because they thought it went on for too long might have been influenced by the TV version. Now that I've actually seen the whole TV version, well, I'm not entirely sure. The new material is still leaps and bounds over what comes after it. Most of it is, anyway. But compared to the first 2 arcs, this is a very different beast. Full filler plots and stories, wholly rewritten elements, and while a lot of the filler is good and interesting, there is some that undermines the real story. I still think it's good overall, but it wavers. Would the TV version still win my top spot like its Toriyama written counterpart? We'll see. It's been a lot of fun taking a second look at where we've been, but next time we get back on track. Just like last year, we're doing a whole Dragon Ball Dissection December, leading off with a grown-up Son Goku versus the oh-so-cunningly concealed threat of Ma Jr. in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc. See you there! Again, and welcome back to DBD TV, where we cover the TV adaptations of the Dragon Ball series. If you're new to Dragon Ball Dissection, this is not my analysis of the arc as a whole. If you're interested in my thoughts on the story and characters, please go here. This video is simply to talk about changes. The TV version of the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai arc began on October 21st, 1987, just after Piccolo Daimao regained his youth in the manga. And let me get right to the point with this video. This is one of those weird situations where I can honestly say, I didn't know. I swear I wasn't setting this up. I only just watched most of these episodes for the first time about a year ago, which was a few months after I covered this arc in Dragon Ball Dissection. So it's only by amazing coincidence that the TV version of this arc actually manages to address and fix most of the problems I experienced with the original version. For obvious reasons, that made this kind of a delight to watch. Let's start with Goku. My problem with Goku is how peripheral he seemed to the story until pretty far in. He misses meeting the main villains, so he has no idea who they are. Neither of his first two fights in the finals really contributes anything to the story, and the first one is so pointless it might as well not have existed at all. Well, as much as I like to joke about the anime introducing characters before they're supposed to be introduced, I really think they did a good service to the plot by having Goku meet Tenshinhan and Chaozu during his training. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it was an amazing or the best introduction those two characters could have had, and especially not for Sudu Sennin, but it actually does stand out among other early introductions. While others have felt like a tacked-on bit before they actually do something relevant, this feels like something of a fake-out for people who haven't read the manga. These two show up in an episodic filler mini-arc, so there's every reason to believe they're just random villains of the week who were thwarted, never to be seen again, like Tenlong from a couple episodes earlier. So what a shock when they not only come back, but are the main villains. And more importantly, in terms of this arc, it makes it so that Goku already has a personal history with these people, so he doesn't just feel like that clueless guy who's along for the ride. Even Goku's stupid, boring, pointless, redundant fight with Panputo is given some extra meat. It doesn't surprise me in the least that the TV staff would want to expand this a bit. I mean, Goku needed his own episode to fill out, and minor things like this are usually easy marks for some fluff. But here's the thing. As far as I see it, they had two choices in how they could have dealt with it. They could have either expanded the fight itself, the most obvious and often used tactic in making filler, but that would have ruined the point of it. Their other option was to expand the story around the fight, which is what they did, and I most certainly think it was a smarter choice to make. So the fight is still just as ridiculously short as in the manga, but the focus is taken off the fight itself. Instead, the threat is passed on to Panputo's scheming manager. Toei took the idea of Panputo being a decorated combat champion and ran with it, making him a huge celebrity and movie star with throngs of screaming fans, including Bluma, and as mentioned, an unscrupulous manager with his own stake in making sure his client is victorious. Wisely figuring out that Goku will probably win the fight, he decides to play on Goku's one weakness, his stupidity, and lures him away from the fight. So Goku is almost disqualified until, in one of the most amazingly ludicrous plot resolutions I've ever seen, Lunch chases after the car that has taken him away because she just bought him ice cream and is livid it might melt before he gets to eat it. But as out of the loop as Goku is in the original version of this story, my other main complaint has been how nearly everybody is removed. Yamcha, Bluma, Lunch, Puar all leave very early on due to Yamcha's hospitalization and are never seen again until the end. Well, the TV series handles this by, well, making one of the most drastic changes I've ever seen in Dragon Ball. Remember how I said in the last tournament that rather than arriving the day of the tournament and leaving the same day, the TV series had them arrive the night before and leave the day after the tournament? Well, they once again arrived the day before, that's standard. But for the first and only time, they stretched this tournament out, so that when all is said and done, the whole event takes 4 days to complete. They'll show up, fight a couple of rounds, and then just go home. In a few spots it's a little ridiculous. Take the first day, for instance. The audience is waiting for quite a while to actually see anything. Remember that non-combatants are not allowed to view the preliminaries. The TV series is exceptionally clear on that rule. Under no circumstances are non-combatants allowed in. Except for right here where they add a scene that's not in the manga where Sudu Sennin is right there. Good job. Where was I? Oh yeah. So the spectators have been waiting outside for Kami knows how long for the real fighting to start. Then finally, it starts. Match 1, Yamcha, Tenshinhan. Okay, that's enough of that, let's go home. Really? Who would put up with that? But on the bright side, it opens the story up for much more interaction among the characters. First off, the night before segment includes a scene where Yamcha and Kuririn sneak out of their hotel room, in their old clothes no less, just to run off some nervous energy before the tournament. Once the tournament gets going, there's all kinds of fun stuff. Sometimes it's as simple as the gang reconvening in Yamcha's hospital room to reflect on the day's events. Other times it's as ridiculous and far-fetched as Sudu Sennin breaking into Goku's room in the middle of the night in an attempt to assassinate him. Yamcha even sneaks out of his hospital room in time to watch the final match. And most of these scenes do quite a bit to add to the carnival-like atmosphere of the tournament. I said in the 23rd Budokai arc that arc did the best job of making the characters really feel like family, of really showing them interact meaningfully together. Well, I have to say it, Toei's version of the 22nd Budokai outstrips Toriyama's 23rd in this regard, no contest. So, as much as I have a hard time believing that people would put up with the tournament being held this way, and as much as it clashes with every other tournament we'll see in the entire series, it's so worth it. Just good luck to all the fans trying to make the anime timeline correspond to the mangas with so many dates out of whack. Not everything is a real winner, though. In a pinch, they always fall back on their easiest joke, having the Muten Roshi do perverted things. And rather than trying to improve Chaozu's characterization, the anime writers stretch out his one main fight by establishing that his head is really hard. Not that head, the one that has the curly hair. I mean the one he uses to thrust with. Moving on. Also, according to this version, Namu comes back to compete in this tournament, and the gang has a nice reunion during a filler lunch break during the preliminaries. Oh, gee, how heartwarming. A character who doesn't appear in the original version of this arc at all suddenly shows up for a tender moment. I can't imagine where this is going. Oh, yep, he's beaten brutally and hospitalized by Ten Shinhan in his last qualifying match in order to establish Ten as a threat and make it personal with Goku. You know, just like what he's about to do to Yamcha. Didn't we already have this problem with King Choppa and Panputo? Why are we adding in another redundant fight? Although, when you think about this in universe, it's kind of funny. Namu gets his head handed to him, he gets out of the hospital. What a rough week! I'm going home where it's safe. Bam, killed by Tambourine. A few missteps aside, Toei does make some interesting choices with the end of the arc, such as having the crowds lift Goku and Ten Shinhan on their shoulders where they get to shake hands. It gets a bit heavy-handed with the Muten Roshi thinking to Ten Shinhan that this is what it's like to be loved by the crowds instead of hated, despite the fact that the crowds seem to like him just fine before. And Yamcha gets to initiate a slow clap! But what I really found interesting was how differently they handled Kuririn's death. In the original, it comes out of nowhere. There's a scream and everyone runs in to find him dead. In this version, they actually have time to follow through on their plan of getting dinner. It's only when they get to the restaurant that Goku realizes he's forgotten his stuff, and it's here that Kuririn volunteers to go all the way back and get it. And for just a moment, Goku stops him. He doesn't know why, he shrugs it off, but for just this one eerily intense moment, Goku feels something is amiss. It doesn't really make any realistic sense, but boy does it add to the drama. It makes us feel off-kilter, whether or not we already know the story. And while it's never directly addressed, it adds a layer to Goku's pain of, I could have prevented this if only I'd said something. That said, while hazy intuition is one thing, it is a bit silly that Goku knows for certain when Kuririn actually dies, despite being far out of earshot in this version. It sure would have been convenient if his Kuririn death senses had been so finely attuned 5 minutes ago. But I think this is a really cool reinterpretation. Speaking of weird intuitions relating to Kuririn's death, it's not just for Goku. During Kuririn's fight with Chaozu, the TV series tries to play off the idea that Chaozu actually kills Kuririn. But it turns out it's just Yamcha having a dream. Geez, everyone thinks Kuririn's going to die, don't they? Well, they're not wrong. And finally, this arc does get a really awesome insert song in the form of Wolf Hurricane, a Yamcha song. Not only is it a song about Yamcha, it's sung by Furuya Toru, Yamcha's voice actor, in character. He has a great set of pipes. It's an awesome song that makes his fight with Ten Shinhan even more fun to watch. Now, several of the actors get to sing songs in character. Most of them are on CDs, but Yamcha is the only character aside from Goku who actually gets a song aired in the show during the original run of the franchise. Gohan gets a couple in the movies. But interestingly, while insert songs were quite in vogue during the last arc, they largely come to an end as soon as Yamcha gets one. Insert your own Yamcha joke here. Since this arc is shorter than the last, I have time to cover the last two original main animation studios, Shindo Pro and Segasha. Shindo Pro is, appropriately enough, headed up by Shindo Mitsuo. It's a fairly decent studio at this point, but not really anything spectacular. I often hear them referred to by fans as the Evil Eye Studio because of how sharply the eyes are drawn, particularly in the late Frieza arc. While Toriyama's art style at this point isn't quite angular enough for them to get into that territory yet, the eyes still do stand out heavily. Segasha, conversely, headed up at this point by Takeuchi Tomikichi, is what I've always thought of as more of a squiggly eye style. Their eyes always look a bit smaller and kind of pinched. Seigasha is definitely in the upper tier in terms of art, and they also have some really expressive animation, which I think is a really good quality. But while I'm usually alone in feeling this way, it sometimes becomes so exaggerated that I'd also be inclined to call this the studio of the rubber people. It's hard to describe, but the characters often move in a very distinctive way. Like when some presence comes out of nowhere, the characters will stretch their necks around very slowly and then snap forward as if they're on springs. When they go in for a punch, their arms will pull back like Stretch Armstrong. Don't get me wrong, like I said, the art quality, at least at this point, is really good, but the animation is just a bit too quirky for my taste. I find it distracting. Both of these studios are going to undergo significant shifts in supervision over the course of the Dragon Ball franchise, so we'll be coming back to them later on to see how they fare. So that's the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai arc, TV style. And as much as I like this arc already, the TV version actually surpasses it in a lot of ways. Toei takes some good chances and it pays off for the most part. It was the surprise gem of my viewing. Next time, we're moving forward with the main series once more. It seems the world is finally at peace until a visitor shows up to change everything. In the Saiyan arc. See you there! Welcome back to DBD TV, where I talk about the TV adaptation of Dragon Ball, how it differs from the manga, what it did right, what it did wrong, how it surprised me. Now we've made it all the way to the Piccolo Daimao arc. If you're looking for my actual 7-part Dragon Ball dissection review and analysis I did on the Piccolo arc 2 years ago, you're in the wrong place. That starts right here. I definitely recommend checking it out before watching this. The Piccolo arc began on February 24th, 1988, just as Mr. Popo tests Goku's strength in the manga. Accompanying it was a completely new opening animation that would be used for the rest of the first series. If you live in the US at least, you might not have ever seen it, as it's been left off of all home video releases here. Now, since the TV series so kindly addresses one of my biggest problems with this arc, I feel it only proper to start with the Choshinsui. The Super God Water in the manga drove me crazy, not only because it was another in a series of retreaded moments from the Red Ribbon arc, but because of how easy it was. Goku doesn't have to earn it or learn anything or struggle in any way other than enduring some vague physical pain. Karin just hands him a teapot and he's on his way. And I can't help but feel the TV writers felt the same way because they totally rewrote this. Karin doesn't possess the Choshinsui, he only knows of its existence and sends Goku through the magic pots he has in the TV series to the icy labyrinth in which it's kept. The labyrinth draws travelers in only to constantly change the path, making sure they never escape. Not only that, but the entity that keeps the Choshinsui, called the Darkness, also plays head games with Goku by taking the guise of the Muten Roshi. This is so much better. It alleviates the problem of it seeming so similar to the Choseisui. It provides an interesting challenge we haven't seen before. It gives plenty of opportunities for comedy with Yajirobe, who falls into the pot by accident. And the Darkness tests Goku physically, mentally, and ethically to see if he's worthy to take the Choshinsui. There are your typical fighting threats to deal with, both in an ice giant and in the fake Muten Roshi, but he has to resist temptations. First he's presented with Kame House and his friends, all of whom try to convince Goku that he should just stay there where it's safe. And when he decides to forge ahead, the fake Muten Roshi traps Goku and Yajirobe on the edge of a cliff and tells Goku he'll give him the water if only he'll let Yajirobe plunge to his death. It's only when Goku refuses that he's presented with the water. So this isn't just insta-power-up add water. It's much more than that, and it makes the whole thing feel more satisfying. I'll even go so far as to say that the temptations fit thematically, too. After all, Goku's whole motivation in this arc is related to his friends who are in danger and keep dying, so forcing him to turn down their easy solution in order to do what's right fits perfectly. And since he still has to turn down an easy solution to save Yajirobe, further drives home that he's committed to his friends and doing the right thing. I'd say the only misstep is that, well, Paradise doth protest too much, to the point that even someone as naive as Goku could easily see through it. Oh, hey, stay down here with us where it's safe. Well, that's not a terrible idea. It'll be good for you, too. You get stronger the more you're down here. Ooh, I do like that. But why? That's kind of weird. And also, we're immortal now. Wait, what? Why? How? Who would believe that? You might as well have them pull Piccolo's corpse out of a closet and say that Oolong killed him. But overall, this is a big improvement. So to balance that out, I'd like to present this opinion to you. I think the Piccolo Daimao arc features the absolute stupidest filler scene in the entire franchise. That's a pretty bold statement to make, I admit. I've never heard anyone else complain about it, which really baffles me since this is just so... You know, I'll just let you decide for yourselves. So the good guys relocate Kame House because Piccolo has the tournament roster that has all their addresses, and they figure it's smart to go where they won't be found. Now, in the manga, Tambourine is just about to go after Yamcha when Piccolo redirects him to find out who killed Symbol. But the TV staff apparently wanted there to be an actual confrontation between the two of them. Okay, not a bad idea, although you have to work around how a crippled Yamcha survives where everyone else has failed. And that has the potential to be cool. The ensuing fight is not that bad. It's just everything that surrounds it that's stupid. Allow me to present a dramatic reenactment of the events. I'm looking for this Yamcha guy, but I seem to be lost. Oh look, a tiny house in the middle of nowhere. Let me see if they know where he lives. Pardon me, do you happen to know where I can find this address? What a coincidence! We just happen to be from that address. We don't live there anymore because we're hiding from a demon trying to kill us. That's why we're telling you, complete and total stranger, that we live there. Wait a minute! So they fight for a little while until the moment before Tambourine is about to deliver the death blow. That's when Piccolo tells Tambourine to go find out who killed Symbol. And then we get this. Well, I could kill you now because I was literally just going to, and it wouldn't take more than a moment. And really, I probably should because I only found you this time through random chance, so if you were to say, go anywhere else, I'd probably never be able to find you again. Since you know who I am and what I'm trying to do, it would make sense if you just went somewhere else. So please just do me a favor and stay right there. I think we're going to stay right here. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an impressively stupid bit of writing, don't you agree? Contextually, I did not change anything there. Bluma literally does blurt out where they're from with absolutely no persuasion. Tambourine does leave Yamcha alive, despite having every reason not to, and never take any action to conceal their whereabouts or ever mention this again, despite Tambourine threatening to come back to this exact location and kill him. Nothing about this displays even a modicum of intelligence. In fact, it is so stupid, I feel it has created a new theoretical paradox. Schrodinger's Yamcha, in which Tambourine is so inept at killing Yamcha, and the Kame House crew are so inept at keeping him safe, that it leaves Yamcha simultaneously dead and alive. Poor dolt. Speaking of Yamcha, after I finished the Piccolo arc before, an awesome fellow named Kid Buu pointed out to me something that I'd missed. Ten Shinhan breaks Yamcha's left leg. Now, Toriyama's fairly consistent after that in showing Yamcha with a cast on his left leg. However, after he arrives to the battle at the end of the arc, probably because Toriyama had only had to draw him from the waist up when he was in the plane, Yamcha's cast is suddenly on his right leg, and it stays that way until he heals. I can't believe I never noticed that before! So, going into this, I was really interested to see if the TV series fixed this inconsistency. Well, they actually did. They fixed it by forgetting about his cast entirely. Good job? Even before he leaves Kame House, he's not shown wearing a cast, and I find that especially odd since the TV series adds in moments where his leg bothers him. So, nobody can get this right. Another big addition to this arc is that of Snow in number 8. See, an added bit of context is that Piccolo's coup happens to take place on the 20th anniversary of the Nation King's ascent to the throne. It would only be more coincidentally cliched if Piccolo killed him the day before his retirement. But because of that, there's a big parade, and they get young girls from all over the world to present the king flowers from their native lands, and Snow is representing Jingle Village. This of course puts her right at ground zero when the attack happens, and while she's not harmed, she's stuck there and spends most of her time taking care of the wounded. Eventually number 8 shows up to find her. Obviously this means her one manga appearance, that of watching Piccolo's announcement on TV with her parents, is removed, since it conflicts with this version of events. I never really thought too much about this before, but I think it's actually an important plot line, and I really like the way it's handled. Snow and number 8 never interact with Goku or any of the other main characters. I mean, obviously it's filler, so there's only so much impact this can have. But I think it's good that way because Snow represents what the regular person caught up in this horror is going through. The helplessness, the courage in the face of adversity, someone who has no fighting prowess still doing her best to make a difference. And I think its power is all summed up in this one scene where Snow picks up a dead soldier's rifle and tries to assassinate Piccolo with it. It's just somewhat unsettling because it's so much more realistic than most of what Dragon Ball tries to do. And it's not just her. The TV series really gets into what's going on the ground, so to speak, with all kinds of little moments. There's a point where the guards are whispering orders to each other about the ongoing attack as the flower ceremony's going on. They're doing their best to contain this situation without disrupting the events or causing a panic. That feels real to me, as well as a grim reminder that these people have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And it's not in that blustering military way that fiction, including Dragon Ball for that matter, often presents these things. You know what I'm talking about, the woo-wee, we're going in guns blazing and we're gonna knock his head off, America! These are people carrying out their jobs professionally. And then there are the reactions from the common people, the ones in the western metropolis fleeing for their lives, the punk kids who try to follow the Mazoku way, only some of them don't actually know how to write Ma in kanji, which is hilarious. We even see Bluma's parents again. And then it does an interesting thing and shows the order of law being broken down once Piccolo announces it is. This is in stark contrast to the manga where the only reactions to Piccolo's announcements are people looking on in horror. The only person who even entertains that these might be good ideas still arms herself and heads out to defeat Piccolo, so we can really assume that nobody jumped at the chance to be evil. But not here. Criminals loot, prisons are torn apart, escaped convicts even go after Kame House, and Yamcha and Lunch have to fight them off. The castle guards take up arms against martial artists to finish what Piccolo started, so it's nice to see Piccolo doesn't just forget about that like he seems to in the manga. It does come across a bit simplistically, especially with how willing the criminals are to go back once Piccolo is defeated, but it does remind me a bit of The Dark Knight Rises and how the less pleasant side of humanity can come out when it's pushed to the edge, and that's an idea Toriyama wouldn't explore in his series until the Buu arc. But as long as I'm on the subject of the guards coming after martial artists, I hate that Gumo and Chi-Chi show up in this arc. I hate that they show up in filler at all because I feel it detracts from the surprise of Chi-Chi returning after so long. However, the appearance in the Red Ribbon Army arc I can look past because they wouldn't have known any better and it's still pretty far off from her return. But by the time they show up here, the TV staff would have already known that Goku and Chi-Chi were going to get married, and that none of the characters would recognize her, and that the audience is supposed to be wondering who she is too. I can totally see Goku not recognizing someone who he ran into on one occasion several years ago. She might as well have been that girl from Oolong's village, just a random person he met on his travels. But after all the times he sees her in the anime and immediately recognizes her, it just seems ridiculous that he doesn't figure out who she is. This arc before, there are a couple of elements of cosmetic interest in regards to Piccolo. As I mentioned when I covered this arc before, in the manga, Piccolo has 4 fingers. That is to say, he has a thumb and 3 fingers on each hand. And that's exhaustive. The original Piccolo does, the second Piccolo does, Dende does. I've always heard that there was a problem with it because apparently Yakuza cut off fingers of people they're trying to intimidate, so you can't have 4-fingered characters on children's television, something like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but for whatever reason, the anime adds a finger to all Piccolos in their kin. Also, Piccolo is established here as having red blood, and the Piccolos will continue to have red blood through the early Saiyan arc, but after his Namekian heritage is revealed, suddenly all Namekians have purple blood. And in fact, Dragon Ball Kai edits footage of red-blooded Piccolo to be purple. For some reason, the order of a lot of events in this arc is shifted around from the original manga. Largely, a lot of exposition is split into smaller bits throughout the arc. Originally, Kamehouse does not find out about the results of the Dragon Ball quest until Tenshinhan radios them on his way to challenge Piccolo, and he tells them everything that has transpired. However, in the TV series, they all arrive at the battlefield while Tenshinhan is there in order to pick up the bodies. Yamcha even volunteers to learn the Mafuba too, but Tenshinhan says he wouldn't be able to learn it without having actually seen it. But it really just ends up leading to a bunch of somewhat redundant conversations. The next episode, Yamcha calls him back to beg again, only to have Tenshinhan hang up on him. Piccolo's TV announcement of taking over the world is separate from his announcement of destroying the world, so they have to call Tenshinhan again, only he doesn't respond because he's already told them everything he's supposed to tell them in that scene. Goku leaves for the battle before Piccolo makes his announcement rather than after. It's all pretty minor stuff, but it meant I had to do a lot of page flipping while following along. Something else I find to be a slight improvement is that Tenshinhan doesn't learn the Mafuba for no reason at all. He doesn't arrive to fight Piccolo only to find his Denshi jar is broken. Instead, Drum is even more of an obstacle because all Tenshinhan wants is an opportunity to get close to Piccolo to use the Mafuba on him. And he finally does, only for Drum to get caught up instead, and Piccolo uses the opportunity to destroy the Denshi jar. I mean, it still ends up being pretty worthless, but not quite as worthless. I guess the only weird thing is that Tenshinhan doesn't die, even though he very clearly caused something with the wave. He even remarks his surprise at it, but it's never really explained. Maybe he's just built up a tolerance to death-inducing moves. We get to see more of the Dragon Ball hunt, and those are some pretty fun adventures. Of particular note are the pirates on a land-based sailing ship just because it's so ridiculous, and Tenshinhan having to confront a man he once crippled. It's a really moving bit of filler that shows just because you turned good doesn't mean that all your crimes are magically wiped away. Something I've always found odd is what Bluma does with Kuririn's corpse. No, I don't mean that. For some reason, once she makes the freezer capsule and shrinks him down, she then puts the capsule into her underwear drawer. Why? Why would you put a dead body in there? I wouldn't put a dead body in mine. I struggle to assume this is some Japanese cultural thing I don't get because, well, there are no capsules in real life to do this with. Picking out underwear in the morning is supposed to be fun, not a reminder of, oh yeah, my friend is dead. Also, why would Bluma have an underwear drawer at Kame House in the first place? It's not like she lives there, but then again, it could be from a capsule too, which I suppose revolutionized how you pack your luggage when you travel. Or maybe she does live there. The TV series puts her there a lot during Yamcha's training, so I don't know. But at the very least, with Kame Sennin and Oolong around, I wouldn't keep them in the living room. And then, towards the end of the arc, she checks it out again and her drawer is organized completely differently. I know, different animation studios. I think I'm just jealous of her drawer dividers. I really need them. Just like the last time there was a time gap, the TV series uses that to create some original filler stories. And just like the last time, it focuses primarily on Goku's training. This time it's centered on Goku's time with Mr. Popo and Kami-sama, and it's probably some of my favorite training episodes. The Piccolo arc to me already feels the most like a classic fantasy martial arts film with its ancient evils, forbidden techniques passed down by long-dead masters, and talismans of gods. These training episodes add even more to that vibe by giving perhaps the most detailed look we ever see into the mechanics and spirituality of the fighting. There are lessons of moving without ringing an attached bell, finding your opponent while blindfolded, emptying one's mind to truly see. And it really gives a solid introduction to Ki, the energy in all living things. Ki has always been a part of the series in relation to the blasts they create, but this is when it expands to other aspects of fighting. In the manga, it's implied that's what Popo's teaching him, but it really just kind of comes into the series without any explanation. Here, it's explicit. That's exactly what Popo's trying to teach Goku. How to sense and suppress Ki so that he can track enemies and keep enemies from tracking him. Goku's teachers send him to other places and even through time to learn these lessons. In fact, Mutaito himself tries to teach Goku how to use his Ki to part a waterfall. And the best part about these is that for once, Goku doesn't just excel at everything. The manga introduces that idea too, but they really take it and run with it here. Pretty much every episode is a standalone training exercise, and they all pretty much come down to Goku almost getting it but not quite, or Goku getting it once but being unable to replicate it. Speaking of traveling through time, here's something I found interesting. In the episode where Goku meets Mutaito, he naturally encounters Kami Sennin and Tsuru Sennin as young men, and they have the same design the anime had given them during the Red Ribbon Army arc. However, the Piccolo arc is the first time we see young versions of them in the manga, and they look completely different. So I was wondering how the TV series would handle that flashback. To my surprise, they went with the manga's designs, but when Goku goes back in time, it's back to the anime designs. Now you could just assume that they later shaved their heads and did away with their sunglasses when they got older, as this encounter is clearly before Mutaito's encounter with Piccolo. However, the flashback adds some information that's not from Toriyama's version. It expands their confrontation with Piccolo into multiple encounters, and Kami Sennin says that after being beaten by Piccolo the first time, Tsuru Sennin leaves and turns evil as he no longer believes in righteousness. Now, that's a pretty important bit of character backstory they added, but I've never heard fans talk about this before. Funnily enough, this means that Tsuru Sennin is not present for Mutaito defeating Piccolo, which makes it unlikely he'd know about hiding the Denshi jar at the bottom of the sea. So it's weird they keep in Chaozu's line wondering if Tsuru Sennin's responsible for recovering it because he really shouldn't know where it is. But anyway, the even younger Tsuru Sennin that Goku encounters still seems pretty evil to me, so I'm not really sure how much attention some writers paid to other writers. We also get a redone look at the new Piccolo's early moments. He is mostly an unquestionably creepy and malicious child, but there's also a sense that he's lonely and resents the happiness of other people. Something I find interesting is that the old couple who find his egg refer to him as a gift from God, or Kami-sama. Earlier, when Tambourine murders Giron in front of a couple of people he's been bullying, they too refer to Tambourine as God. I'd be horrified, but they apparently are delighted to see someone brutally killed. I have to suspect the TV series was pulling a bit of intentional irony here, since even in the earlier instance, they know that God would be a character in the show. But I especially love the double meaning. They're calling things gifts from God that clearly turn out to be malevolent. But they technically are gifts from God because God is responsible for bringing Piccolo into being in the first place. That's unexpectedly clever. The filler episodes actually end, though, with the other fighting characters going out on their own adventures. Kami Sennin basically reads them the Riot Act, saying that they'll never get as strong as Goku because while Goku has constantly gone out and encountered new foes and teachers, they just stay here leeching off of him. So they decide to find Carding Tower. You know the tiny wife beater that Chaozu wears during the Saiyan and Frieza arcs? It actually debuts here, long before its manga counterpart. But they eventually make their way to a village with a giant mountain and mountain god and cute girl for Kuririn to crush over, and Chaozu is the only one who recognizes that it's a volcano that's about to explode. The heroes do their best to stop it using various methods to redirect or extinguish the molten doom, all while having to endure the villagers not believing that they're doing any good, that the mountain god will save them. Of course, I have to endure the characters not knowing the difference between lava and magma. This stuff right here is lava. Stop calling it magma, it's not underground. But it's a lot of fun. It's nice to see these four interact together. It introduces the idea that Kuririn and Yamcha should learn how to fly, and really the whole concept of towns with eccentric, troublesome villagers and a problem to be solved and a volcano. Okay, it reminds me specifically of the episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender called The Fortune Teller, even though this clearly came first and I even saw it first. But I love that show. I love that this had that kind of vibe, and I wish there was more of it in Dragon Ball. Before I go, I'll take a moment to talk about a couple of voices. Nakawa Ryusei is most well known in Dragon Ball circles for playing a certain villain, Frieza. However, he cut his teeth on a slightly lower profile villain, Tambourine. And then there is the late, great Aono Takeshi. He got his start in Dragon Ball for his memorable turn as the hilarious Murasaki. It just goes to show how impressive his range is that he then came back to voice the main villain of this arc, the Great Demon King Piccolo. And perhaps demonstrating greater range still, he's able to go from the maniacal cackling Piccolo to the calm, wise Kami-sama. Since he did not go on to play the reincarnated Piccolo, this role is probably what most fans know him for. But it's definitely worth remembering just how crazy and deliciously evil he could get with Murasaki and Piccolo. Finally, there's the music. If you're not familiar with the piece of music I use in the opening for this arc, it's one of the many variations of Piccolo's theme. I think Piccolo's theme is one of the most famous character themes of the Kikuchi score. He certainly uses it a lot. Most of the movies feature some new variation on Piccolo's theme, including one which is my personal favorite, but we'll get to that some other day. But it's awesome. It's so regal and intimidating. I feel like I could talk about this arc all day. There are just so many things. But I have to rein myself in eventually. But it should be obvious at least that I feel this version is a huge improvement over Toriyama's. There are definitely a handful of problems, but it alleviates a lot of the bigger issues I had with the way the story is constructed, The characters and world feel so much more alive, and the stakes feel so much higher. In general, I prefer the manga, but this one knew what it was doing. Next time, the gang leaps into outer space to bring their dead friends back to life, but they must contend with Dragon Ball's most famous villain, who just won't stop coming back. I'm talking about the Frieza arc. This is the one that changes everything, people, and I can't wait to share it with you. See you there! Welcome back to DBD TV, the offshoot of Dragon Ball Dissection, where I explore the elements exclusive to the television adaptations of the Dragon Ball story. This is not my review and analysis of this story arc. If that's what you're looking for, please first check out the 4-part review of the manga because I'm assuming in this video that you already have. The TV version of the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc began airing on November 9th, 1988, just after Piccolo's arm is removed by Raditz in the manga. I suppose it's fair to start with the biggest elephant in the room. It's the production element this arc introduces that, to this day, is apparently the biggest controversy in the entire franchise, at least in my neck of the woods. This is the arc where Goku and Kuririn officially grow up. In the manga, this only meant that Toriyama's editor was having apoplectic fits over whether or not the audience would accept this new version of the main character. But in the anime, there was the little matter of the vocal casting. Well, Toei chose to keep Nozawa Masako and Tanaka Mayumi in the roles of Goku and Kuririn respectively, rather than recast them with adult males. And 29 years later, people are still engaged in heated debates on the subject. Well, at least in terms of Goku, I never really see anybody complain about Kuririn. I've never gotten why this is such a big deal, and no amount of "a grown man doesn't sound like that" thrown in my direction is going to make me change my mind. Obviously, the choices were between establishing a more realistic pitch for a man or maintaining a consistent performance of the characters. Toei went for the latter, and I respect that. If they hadn't, it would have forced viewers to accept that these totally different voices are supposedly the same characters they've come to know and love for the past few years, including the main character who has appeared in every single episode and who has a very distinctive voice. While certainly not impossible, that's a big pill to swallow. I think we can all agree that it's fairly jarring when a character is suddenly voiced by a different actor, like in episode 137 when Yanami Joji, the narrator, is voicing Kame Sennin instead of Miyauchi Kohei. That's pretty jarring. But this way, Goku always sounds like Goku, only slightly deeper. Just like how pubescent males in real life don't get a brand new voice, but just a deeper version of what they already have. There's not the risk of some new actor coming in who's simply not able to recreate the same character nuances. It's unequivocally the same person. And listening to Nozawa's first lines in episode 133, I am totally sold. Every time. It matches the visual perfectly. It's a more mature Goku, but it's still instantly recognizable as Goku. I don't find it to sound at all traditionally feminine any more than it did when Goku was a kid. I don't recall ever having a difficult transition, and Nozawa wasn't the first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth Goku I ever listened to. By now, it's something I never even think about. The voice is just Goku, and Tanaka's voice is just Kuririn. This is about as straightforward an adaptation as they come. In the 22nd Budokai, the anime staff split the tournament across multiple days, leaving plenty of opportunity for original material. But that's not the case here, so I really didn't think I'd have a lot to say. But it turns out, upon doing research, that simply the fact that this arc is so close to the manga might be worth talking about. As I'm sure you're aware, the 23rd Budokai is the last manga material to be adapted before the anime decided to relaunch the series with a new name, Dragon Ball Z. Toriyama's editor at this time, Torishima Kazuhiko, gave an interview with Forbes last year. It is extremely insightful and worth a read, containing oodles of DB and jump-related info I'd never encountered before. In fact, so interesting was it, I felt the need to discuss it further on Kanzenshuu the podcast. The interview revealed there were some production troubles going on at the time, or at least Torishima thought so. He had never been pleased with the anime adaptation of Dr. Slump, feeling he didn't have enough control at keeping the TV series in line with the manga, and his displeasure continued through Dragon Ball. He claimed that the tipping point for him was Goku killing Piccolo, which he thought was a clear sign that the producer in charge of the series was treating it in the same comedic way as Dr. Slump. Personally, I don't see it, but it quickly led to some important staff changes, despite the fact that all this happened right as Torishima was stepping down as Toriyama's editor. He snaked 2 staff members from Saint Seiya, and beginning with the episode just before the start of this arc, Morishita Kozo and Koyama Takao officially joined the staff of Dragon Ball. Morishita shared planning credit with Shichijo Keizo, who had been credited for the entire series up to this point, and is apparently the producer Torishima claimed he could no longer work with. I have nothing with which to back this up, but I suspect Shichijo only continued to be credited as a courtesy, and probably had nothing to do with the series from this point on, as his name was dropped entirely once Dragon Ball Z started. Koyama is credited for writing the first episode he worked on, among many others, but he was also given a brand new title the series had never used before, that of Series Composition. I've mentioned Koyama before on DVD as he's the man behind the Dragon Ball Z movies. On the next DVD TV, we'll explore a bit more how this change in leadership led to the Dragon Ball TV series ending in favor of its successor Dragon Ball Z. But in a lot of ways, under this new leadership, this is essentially the first arc of Dragon Ball Z, and the name change afterwards is just a formality. If you need any more convincing, look no further than Ma Jr. taking the entire first act to power up his Cho Bakuretsu Maha. Literally, the entire first act is charging an attack. If that doesn't scream Dragon Ball Z in the way that show was paced, I don't know what does. Anyway, on to the changes. The characters' introductions are dramatized quite a bit more. In the manga, they literally just show up. But here, Goku, or this mysterious stranger still shrouded by his umbrella, is on hand to help Bulma retrieve a balloon for a little girl. For the other 4, they zip onto the scene in a show of colored trails, but only after they've made everyone wait for the last possible moment before the registration closes. Sure, it's reusing the manga's idea of Goku running late from the 22nd Budokai, but what I found fascinating is how it hints at a divided loyalty among the group. With no other recourse, the group comes up with the idea of having Oolong and Puar transform into 2 of their missing friends and register in their places. Bulma suggests they transform into Krillin and Yamcha. However, Lunch thinks that's unfair and would prefer Oolong and Puar transform into Ten Shinhan and Chaozu. I suppose it's meant to follow up on Lunch's crush on Ten Shinhan, despite the fact that she's known Krillin and Yamcha for years longer. But I guess if I'd been in her place with Bulma making the decision so abruptly and with such finality, I'd probably stand up for those with the short straws too. There's just a lot that seems to be under the surface with this scene, so it's a shame it's never really followed up on. Like the other animated tournaments, they register the night before and then get a hotel scene. It's 2 people per room, and I suppose I could go into what each duo says about their interpersonal relationships, but all the matchups seem fairly obvious. The only thing I find of particular interest is the attention to detail paid to Goku. Remember that when Goku takes his weighted clothes off against Ten Shinhan, he reveals he's been wearing them continuously for quite a while. And having Goku go to bed would have been all too easy an opportunity to mess that up. But no, Goku is clearly shown wearing his weighted undershirt in bed, but it's subtle enough to never notice until a repeat viewing. I'm quite proud of them. This also gives the anime a chance to do what they love to do best, preempt character introductions. Well, kinda. I mean, we already met Ma Jr. before, but this is the first time we see his adult form. In the manga, we meet him at the tournament, when the characters meet him, but here we see him the night before, saving a little boy from falling clock debris. I have no idea why he does this, since he's supposed to be evil, and it's not like he's showing off his power for anybody that matters to him, but it does look pretty cool. It's a bit confusing, but I'm left knowing one thing for certain. Ma Jr. hates model car kits. I don't know. I think that's a subtle dig at Toriyama. There's all the minor additions of the variety we've come to expect. Oolong and Puar break the non-competitor's rule by transforming into that, and flying into the preliminaries just long enough to be noticeable, but not long enough to contribute jack squat to the proceedings. Yajirobe gets to bite his opponent on the ass. Why? Ten Shinhan is given a brief flashback of his younger self being beaten around by Tao Pai Pai, which marks the only time we ever see a young Ten Shinhan. Yamcha is given a few moments where he seems to connect with the pain Tenshinhan is going through. When Chaozu is taken to the hospital, his friends actually give a rat's ass, and Bluma and Lunch briefly accompany him. And when he returns at the end, he's given a close-up as opposed to the stick figure Toriyama drew for him in the manga. This must be the closest Chaozu has ever come to feeling love. Chi-Chi probably gets the most to work with here. When she and Goku get together, the entire gang go backstage to figure out what in the world is going on. During this meeting, the TV series introduces a nice additional callback. Obviously, the manga flashes back to the earlier Goku Chi-Chi scenes, but in the anime, she remembers Yamcha as well and his pretend declarations of love, much to his embarrassment. In fact, the anime pretty much has Yamcha act as Chi-Chi's babysitter for the rest of the arc, as he's often pulling her out of harm's way or just huddling with her. But what I could really do without is Chi-Chi constantly screaming, "Goku, stop!" over and over and over again. I do find it funny that at one point Lieutenant Roshi suggests that they found the new lunch, which is pretty much how the anime treats her character. So you know how I love, read, hate, when fans look at that Sergeant Metallic scene from the Red Ribbon arc, you know, the one where it reads alien on his optic display, and people are all, "Oh, it's foreshadowing because Goku's actually an alien and stuff." Yeah, I hate that. But you know, I can turn unsubstantiated coincidence into conspiracy theories too! You ever notice how, when Shen and Ma Jr. are talking to each other in their foreign language, the sky turns green? It's like Namek! It's totally foreshadowing that they're actually from a planet with a green sky! No. No, it's not. Don't believe that. Nope, nope. I see you going to make a comment about it right now. Don't you do it! I mean it! Don't. In the manga, the arc ends with Goku and Chi-Chi riding off to start their oh-so-happy lives together, with a tiny panel of Kame-Sennin breaking the fourth wall to tell us that the series isn't over yet. But apparently the anime's too good for breaking the fourth wall now, so instead we just have him wondering to himself if this is the end, only to get hit on the head with a coconut. That's what you get. You don't break the fourth wall, I break your head. But while in the manga, this was nothing more than a transition from Dragon Ball Chapter 194 to Dragon Ball Chapter 195, the anime was using this opportunity to draw to a close and relaunch itself as a new series, Dragon Ball Z. But despite the fact that the story arc closes on such a point of finality that Toriyama needed a character to directly address the audience to assure them the series wasn't over, that ending apparently wasn't good enough for Toei Animation, as they decided to put in their own 5-episode story to close out the television series. Goku and Chi-Chi return to Mount Frypan for their wedding, where Gyumo presents Chi-Chi with her mother's wedding dress. But just as everything is peaceful and happy, a fire erupts on Mount Frypan. Again. And to put it out, Goku and Chi-Chi must look for the Basho-sen. Again. Because, hey, the castle may have been on fire for a decade in the past, but this time, not only is Gyumo stuck in the castle, but so is the wedding dress! You know, even though it was probably in the castle last time and it still survived the fire, and a giant Kamehameha blowing the castle to pieces, but now it's really in danger, and that's important for some reason. Don't get me wrong, I'd slay a few demons myself to get my hands on that dress. But it hardly seems worth it to get stuck in a burning building for, and it seems even less worthy of a whole story arc. It seems they put the Ox Demon King in there just because they knew the dress did not serve as high enough stakes, but it almost seems like the dress is more important. These episodes are often referred to as the wedding dress arc after all. But considering Goku and Chi-Chi are literally flying to the opposite end of the world and back over the course of 5 episodes, the repeated shots of Gyumo running through the castle clutching the dress devolve from tense to laughable to tedious. If he's not dead after all this time, I think he's gonna be okay. And since these episodes aired well into the run of the Saiyan arc in the manga, which introduced Gyumo's big old grandpa redesign, the anime gets the jump on that by including it here. But what is it that Goku and Chi-Chi have to do? Well, first they go visit Uranai Baba, who apparently agrees to divine the location of the Basho-sen for free, despite her brother's life not being at stake this time. Or maybe Goku beat the 5 warriors off screen, I don't know, or maybe she's getting a discount right now because she's suffering from a cold and can't divine crap. All she can figure out is that it's connected to an octagon, which leads them to the multi-leveled fetch quest. I mean, Octagon Village. Octagon Village is apparently the home of Oolong and all the other perverted T-named pigs, which would be an awesome chance to develop Oolong if he was actually in this episode. The fan isn't there, but there's a carving resembling a diagram in one of the Muten Roshi's books, so Goku and Chi-Chi seek help from Umigami. He finds the book, which says the feathers of the fire-eating bird are used to make the Basho Sen. That's just a bunch of crap Muten Roshi wrote when he was drunk. However, the scientist studying the bird directs them to Mount Frappe, and it supposedly has snow that can put out any fire. That doesn't work because, well, snow melts, but Chi-Chi finds the Basho Sen being used as a dustpan at the house of a woman who collects honey from bees who live in octagonal beehives. They return with a fan, but it makes the fire worse because the fan was actually originally used to stoke the flames of the furnace of 8 divinations in the Mountain of 5 Elements, which just happens to be on the opposite side of the world from Mount Frypan, and the furnace is what is apparently causing the flames. So Goku and Chi-Chi brave the spirits of the mountain and get to the furnace. The furnace can't be turned off though because spirits use steam to travel back and forth between the next life. However, through their quest, Goku and Chi-Chi happen to have the fire-eating bird, eggshell, and octagonal bee honey necessary to seal the hole in the furnace, which Goku does after using the Basho Sen to split the flames, so the day is saved and they get married. The end. Did everybody get all that? This is the most convoluted plot I've ever seen in Dragon Ball, and to this day, I barely understand a lick of it. I mean, it's just so convenient that their wild goose chase got them all the items they ultimately needed. But it doesn't seem like there was any real rhyme or reason to the places they went. I mean, you could say it was Udonai Baba divining them on the right track, but how? Because the Octagon wasn't supposed to be the village, it was the furnace all along. If Kame-Sennin made up the stuff in his book, why is it carved into the lake? Why is there an Octagon woman? Is she the Octagon from the vision, or are the beehives? If the stuff about the bird was drunken ramblings connected to nothing, why did the eggshell end up being necessary? Why did the eggshell end up in a perfectly octagonal shape? And how does honey patch a hole in a furnace? It's all very contrived, but I just can't bring myself to hate this. It's all so charming. Especially in retrospect of what's to come, it feels like the perfect little breather. I mean, while I think if they were wanting to end this series, the 23rd Budokai was a much better fit than this story overall, the ending with Goku and Chi-Chi getting married and Udonai Baba hiding the future stories from us works pretty well too. And especially considering the new staff members have taken over by this point, it's amazing to me just how nostalgic this feels. I mean, this is really one last hurrah for the early style of Dragon Ball, especially given its inclusion of the Pilaf characters in Gohan. The story never feels as classically Asian as this again. And well, it makes sense considering the final stop of their journey is heavily based on Taoist teachings and Journey to the West in particular. The Furnace of 8 Divinations display the Bagua, the Taoist trigrams representing the 8 fundamental principles of reality, as written by Lao Zhe, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing any of that wrong. In Journey to the West, a fictionalized version of Lao Zhe, as the Taijo Rokun, or Grand Supreme Elder Lord, traps Sun Wukong in his alchemical furnace, similar to how Goku enters the Furnace of Anin, also referred to as the Taijo Rokun. Not long after, the Buddha traps Sun Wukong in a mountain made of his hand, referred to as, you guessed it, the Mountain of 5 Elements. So it seems especially interesting that after the staff member switch, they'd have fillers still pulling from Journey to the West elements, similar to the Ginkaku Kinkaku episode. And even aside from that, I'm surprised they added so much to the mythology of the afterlife, especially given that this scene came out after the manga had introduced Dragon Ball's version of what happens after death. The warning about spirits stuck in this world fits pretty well given what we know about those killed by demons, so I enjoy a lot of this stuff. I also really like this swan song for Pilaf. There are some great gags with them. Their lack of recognition of Goku as an adult is pretty hilarious, as is the fact that Pilaf took his experience with Piccolo to heart, calling himself Mr. Pilaf Daimo. But most importantly, it's amazing seeing Goku and Chi-Chi work together on a quest. While Chi-Chi is almost uncomfortable in her subservient little wifey shtick, it's such a refreshing change of pace to see them get along so well. Chi-Chi is for sure at her most enjoyable here, and it's a shame we couldn't see more of this side of her. So while the stakes of the quest don't serve as the best conclusion for a TV show, the final significant callbacks to Journey to the West, Gohan, and Pilaf, whether they were intended to be final or not, do serve as significant thematic resolutions. As ridiculously contrived as the plot is, it's still a lot of fun, and I'm glad it's here. So that's it for the 23rd Budokai arc. There will not be any Dragon Ball Dissection episodes in November. November's lineup will consist of a subscriber Q&A and another foray into Mario RPG, so I hope you enjoy both of those. But after that, Dragon Ball Dissection December begins again, and we're looking at a lot of variety this year, featuring the beginning of the Cell arc and the 5th Dragon Ball Z movie. But the first entry this year will be DBD TV's first December appearance, with the anime adaptation of the Saiyan arc. See you there! Welcome back to DBD TV, the spin-off of Dragon Ball Dissection, where I discuss the animated adaptation of Toriyama Akira's Dragon Ball manga. If you're looking for my 8-part review and analysis of the Saiyan arc, I'm afraid you're in the wrong place. But I highly recommend you check it out since major story points won't be covered here. This is all about that wonderful happy phenomenon known as filler. And welcome also to our first stop of the 5th annual Dragon Ball Dissection December, my yearly Dragon Ball Dissection Marathon where I put out a new episode once a week for the entire month of December. I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and make the assumption that this is going to be one of the easiest Dragon Ball Dissection scripts I've ever had to write. I pretty much know the entire animated Saiyan arc by heart. There is literally no other part of the anime I know as vividly as this. I don't think I would even need to refresh myself on the material because I already know exactly what I want to talk about. Like so many American fans, it was my introduction to the franchise. I recorded every episode off of the TV, and of course I had to endure how many times they were rerun before the American Season 3 was released. Years later, when I was an adult, it was the first and, for a time, only Dragon Box to be released, so once again, I watched those episodes more than subsequent ones. The Saiyan arc is what got me into this series, and based on the fact I gave the manga Saiyan arc the 9 score, it's no secret that I find it one of the high watermarks of the series. But as I mentioned last time I covered this arc, it also makes me keenly aware of the possibility of nostalgia bias creeping in. You always remember your first, after all. And of course, I lay awake at night, tossing and turning in cold sweats, wondering if I gave the Saiyan arc a 9 instead of a 10 just to throw you off the trail, just to make it seem like I'm being objective, when in reality, I'm in denial about pushing my pro-Saiyan agenda on all of you. In all seriousness, I am the product of my experiences, and it's impossible to know for sure what affects me and why. But I feel I've done the best I can over the years to examine and re-examine all of my opinions of Dragon Ball, to give each arc its fair shake. There are elements I'm plenty nostalgic for that I've been highly critical of in Dragon Ball Dissection, and the opposite has been true as well. And I don't think it's any different with the Saiyan arc, but I feel it's only fair to bring it up. So last we left the powers that be in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc, Toriyama's editor Torishima Kazuhiko had asked for a change in some key positions of the anime staff, and so Morishita Kozo and Koyama Takao were brought on board in time for that story arc. But that wasn't the end of the changes to come. Now, 2 years ago when I covered this arc before, I stated that there had never been an official source explaining why the TV series split the manga into 2 parts. All we had was Toriyama confirming that while he did come up with the name Dragon Ball Z at the request of Toei Animation, he felt the name of the series was fine the way it was and never did change the name of his own work from just Dragon Ball. And again, let me stress for all of you who might be new, there is no Dragon Ball Z manga, just like there's no Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 novel. The manga is just one series. But in the interim between the manga Saiyan arc videos and this one came the Forbes interview with Torishima I discussed last time. The new anime producer also was very smart and said that if we had a new title and that Dragon Ball would finish and we started a new show, then that meant the anime would get more money for promotion. So there you have it. Dragon Ball Z came into existence not for any story or tonal reasons, but because of marketing. Since Kozo had come on board for the 23rd Budokai arc, that obviously meant his idea of relaunching as a new series wouldn't have been explored until then, making the Saiyan arc the first clean dividing point to do so. Which I guess means that this is now DBZD... You know what, never mind. This is just getting too complicated. I had no idea the English language had so many letters that ended in an E sound, but apparently I have the monopoly on them in this title. So, while Dragon Ball Z was just a marketing stunt, continued adapting a manga that was just one series, and was helmed by largely the same staff that had made the previous show, that doesn't mean that there weren't any actual changes between the two. Most obviously, with the new branding came a new theme song, the iconic Chala Head Chala, which is so well known that I dare say even most American fans have some familiarity with it, despite it rarely making its way across to our shores for adaptations. The song was performed by Kageyama Hironobu, who would become the voice of Dragon Ball songs for years to come. He performed both of Dragon Ball Z's opening themes, one of the ending themes, themes for specials, themes for movies, themes for CDs, themes for video games, and it all started here. Speaking of music, Kikuchi Shunsuke remains the composer and a lot of his tracks carry over into this new series, but this is one of the last times there's a huge push for new series music. As I've said while covering the movies, while the series will continue to receive regular infusions of new music, most of it in the Z era comes from the movies. For example, by the time Nappa and Vegeta land, the series is using music from the first Z movie. And hey, with the exception of 1989, that's 2 new movies a year, so that's nothing to sneeze at. But at the very beginning, there are a lot of new action themes, music based around Chala Head Chala, and quite a few character themes. There's a Saiyan theme and a Vegeta theme, and several variations of a cute little upbeat theme for Gohan. Z also introduced episode recaps having their own dedicated piece of music. The next episode previews always had that, but in the first series, the recap would just use existing music from the rest of the score. From this point on though, all Dragon Ball animation would use a specific piece of music just for recaps, based on a main theme song. What else, well, technically didn't start, but really took off here, were the episode titles. You know what I'm talking about. It's that formula of describing episode, follow-up sentence to expound on first sentence. The first Dragon Ball TV series mostly had short to-the-point episode titles. A few 2-part titles cropped up here and there, but they definitely became more prevalent in the 23rd Budokai, and then once Z hit, they became the standard. I think I can count the episodes from this point on that don't follow the formula on one hand, and I'm pretty sure they're all from early episodes. But it's endured through Z, GT, Kai, and now Super, not to mention nearly all the original Dragon Ball Z movies. Finally, as I mentioned in the 21st Budokai arc, I don't really focus on manga to anime color changes like whatever the heck is up with carding. That's partly because Toriyama's not terribly consistent himself, but it's also because I'm colorblind and often don't notice them. But I have always noticed that the shift to Z did give the anime staff an opportunity to nudge at least one ubiquitous element closer to its manga counterpart. The TV show had always presented the Kame uniform as red with a black belt and yellow patches, and when Goku presented his modified version of the outfit, the undershirt was likewise black, although strangely enough the end credits color are blue. But starting here, reds become oranges, blacks become blues, and yellows become whites, similar to how it was always colored in the manga, so good on them. Then again, this is also the arc that introduces Vegeta, and everyone knows about that little snafu, where he has green armor and red hair in his first couple of appearances before arriving on Earth in his more traditional color scheme. Nappa changes to a lesser extent, having the same brown armor accents as Raditz, which become yellow when he reaches Earth. With all of that out of the way, let's get to it. Doragon Boru Zetto, or Dragon Ball Z, premiered on April 26, 1989, while Kuririn, Piccolo, and Gohan are defending against Nappa in the manga. The Saiyan arc is a notable entry in the TV adaptations in that I think it might have been the most concentrated amount of original filler material. See, I mentioned last time that Torishima asked for a change in staff because he thought the producer at the time was treating the material too comedically. And I still don't see it that way. Personally, I wonder if the answer isn't in his comments about wanting to keep a tighter leash on the series. While the Dragon Ball adaptations as a whole are extremely faithful, most times recreating panels one-to-one, I do feel the first TV series takes more liberties than the second. Look at the Piccolo arc that Torishima complains about. I even mentioned in that DVD TV episode how difficult it was for me to watch the series while following along in the manga due to things like scenes being shifted around and scenes being combined with other scenes. There are very few instances in Dragon Ball Z of major plot points being rewritten so heavily, a la the Choshinsui quest. I'd say the largest change here is flipping the order of Gohan's transformation scene with Chi-Chi's scene at Kame House, so that the former takes place on the following night. That leaves the original night open for a hilariously awkward scene of Kuririn visiting the Son home and utterly failing to deliver the bad news. So while it's odd, given that supposition, that 10 solid episodes of this arc would be filler, it's really not much that significantly steps on the toes of Toriyama's material. Don't get me wrong, most of it is well integrated, but there is a reason people say a manga edit of Dragon Ball, a la Dragon Ball Kai for Dragon Ball Z, would be a much more difficult task to accomplish. But I really like this content. As I said when I covered the Saiyan arc before, and maybe it's nostalgia talking, the arc feels like it's missing something without that huge chunk of filler between the Raditz fight and the fight with Nappa and Vegeta. The middle of the manga version has always felt rushed to me, specifically in regards to how it handles Gohan. Remember, he is introduced as a mini Goku, but in looks only. His personality is in stark contrast to his father. While I find the pace of episode 1 to be ridiculously slow in setting up the plot points of this story arc, by spending most of its runtime showing Gohan screw around in the woods, hey, another example of the anime introducing characters before they show up in the manga. It is an intentional callback to filler in the first episode of the previous TV series. In it, Goku makes sport of an aggressive saber tiger, having the time of his life doing so. Gohan, well, doesn't. Like various aspects of the manga, this serves to contrast the two characters, so it always annoyed me that Toriyama would set up a difficulty for Gohan to overcome, only to skip ahead 6 months after it's largely been solved. But this added material in the middle of the arc, which mostly focuses on Gohan, shows his struggle and development step by step and allows us to get to know him that much better. There are even a couple of really strong downer endings, which Dragon Ball doesn't typically do. Gohan loses his robot friend, he fails to stop his pet dinosaur from getting eaten, and he's forced to abandon his orphan friends to the authorities in the hope that they'll ultimately have better lives. They really tug at the heartstrings. Whether he's reacting to the loss of his tail, trying to save others from perceived injustices, teaching himself how to patch up his own wounds, forage for food, or even escape from his training, they all feel like important steps to prepare Gohan for what's to come. And they culminate in Gohan making it all the way home, but returning to Piccolo, accepting his responsibility rather than having it forced on him. His journey is just so much more palpable here than it is in the manga, and I didn't even know for years that these episodes were something some other fans took issue with. Some say it's negated by the fact that even after all of that, he still panics when confronted by Nappa, so this material is at complete odds with the real story. I don't know. Maybe if I'd read the manga first I'd feel the same way, but I just don't agree. It always made sense to me. Gohan's been through a lot, but I'd say there's a world of difference between becoming self-sufficient to witnessing the adults around him being blown up and dismembered. So I can totally buy that he'd be able to be self-sufficient in the wild, but still freak out when being confronted by the realities of a battle this intense. Speaking of Gohan making it home, the TV Saiyan arc introduces an issue regarding that. Since the TV series opens with the domestic life of Goku and his family, it raises the question of, where does Goku live anyway? If you remember, at the very beginning, he lives in the tiny house he shared with his grandfather. In the second arc, he returns there to get his stuff, and that's it. We never see Goku return to that house again. In the manga Saiyan arc, we're introduced to Goku, Gohan, and Chi-Chi at Kame House. They go straight into a hospital after that, and then space after that. We don't really see them at home. So, what's the anime to do? Just make up a home! And the idea is one I like quite a bit. They establish in the first episode that it's a larger home built right next to the house Goku grew up in for a cute connection to his roots. The house is something of a combination of old style and capsule style architecture. And in the episode with the orphans, it's established that it's located on Mount Paozu. Paozu is a type of Chinese steamed bun and is the same name as the old lady in Oolong's village who gives Goku and Bulma a Dragon Ball. So this TV-exclusive homestead sticks around for a while, including the first several Dragon Ball Z movies. But as I stated in the late Frieza arc, there's a brief scene with Chi-Chi and Gyumao where we finally do see Goku's home, which becomes more prominent in the Cell arc and beyond, and, as expected, it looks totally different and is in a completely different location. So, once the anime gets to the Cell arc, their house is never seen or mentioned again, nor is Mount Paozu. Although that doesn't keep people from using the name to this day, much to my chagrin. You know what also brings out the chagrin in me? Not being able to finish a DVD TV arc in a single episode. But that just means there's much more to talk about. Check back a week from today for the conclusion to the Saiyan arc. See you there! We've got quite a month ahead, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If this is your first Dragon Ball Dissection exposure, check out the link to the full playlist.
「胸がバチバチするほど騒ぐ
welcome back to DVD TV, the red-headed stepchild of the Dragon Ball Dissection family, where we take an uncomfortably long look at material exclusive to the television adaptation of the Dragon Ball franchise. In regards to the ending of my last video, well, I went a little off the deep end. Don't get me wrong, I actually like the Mount Paozu house better than the manga house, but that still doesn't make that house or the name Mount Paozu part of the manga continuity, and I feel compelled to stamp out that notion whenever I can because it's pretty pervasive. I should have left it there though, but instead I also claimed the term was never used again after that. But it does rear its ugly head in dialogue in the 10th Z movie, which, you know, doesn't really count to begin with. The 10th anniversary Dragon Ball movie, which, hey, is its own standalone continuity, and, Dragon Ball GT, which technically is part of the anime continuity, or at least an anime continuity. Do you think I can get a pass if Dragon Ball Super totally overwrites it? As far as I've been able to confirm, it's never used in the Dragon Ball Z series again, but at this point I'm not willing to commit to anything because as soon as I say it, someone will find another example I missed. So I'll just leave it at the important points that the show gave Goku a different house, backpedaled to match the manga design, and gave the mountainous area where he grew up a name which does not exist in the original manga. Moving on. Last time we left off, Gohan had many more adventures in the wilderness than his manga counterpart, but Gohan isn't the only character to get attention with this filler. Goku has stuff to do! The Serpentine Road isn't just a pointless time sink, but a treacherous journey. The Chekhov's gun set up in the manga actually gets a payoff when Goku takes a nap on a street sweeper's truck, and the fact that the Serpentine Road has a street sweeper is just beautiful in and of itself. Only to fall off and land in hell and have to compete against the two ogres who work there in order to find a secret passage back to Enma's desk. It's a hell of a lot of fun. A hell of a lot of fun. A hell of a lot of fun. Later on, he comes across the palace of the Snake Princess, who does her best to seduce Goku with, of course, Goku oblivious to the whole thing, until he ultimately has to fight her to get away. Neither of these really ties into the main story, but I like them. And, oh, that man candy. When Goku does reach Kaios, his training goes a little differently. In the manga, it takes him 40 days to catch bubbles. However, in the anime, it only takes him 3 weeks, with the remaining time used to train against a new character, Gregory the Cricket, who doesn't care for Goku's lack of respect towards Kaiosama. But he was actually designed by Toriyama for the anime staff. And that's not all. While taking a break, Goku convinces Kaio to tell him the backstory of the Saiyans, which comes from a memo Toriyama wrote. There had originally been 2 races on the planet, the Saiyans and the Sufurujin, or Sufurians, the latter of whom were physically weak but technologically advanced. Eventually a war broke out because, get it, vegetables versus fruits? The Saiyans won and teamed up with aliens to serve as muscle to conquer planets until the god of the Saiyan planet, unable to tolerate evil, summoned meteors to destroy them all. That last little bit doesn't appear to be part of Toriyama's memo, and so it should come as no surprise that it's completely contradicted later on by the manga's assertion that it was Frieza, and Kaio's status as an upper god makes it unlikely that he was simply unaware of the real story. Everyone talks about that one though, but perhaps you didn't notice this little tangle. During his story, Kaio, in no uncertain terms, says that Saiyans transform into monsters at the full moon. And Goku does not react to this at all. At all. As for the Sufurians, I'm sure they'll never come up again. But aside from Goku and Gohan, even the rest of the characters get a few moments. First, to elaborate on my aspersions cast against the first episode, I like the idea of us spending time with Gohan before his life turns upside down, rather than just throwing him into the story, even though it pulls the audience away from the Kame House gang's perspective at meeting him for the first time and experiencing the same shock they do. I just think with how much of it there is and how slowly it's paced, it doesn't really work as a first episode for a new series, which is what they were apparently going for by making it a new series. It works much better as an episode 154. But I do think they did a great job of reintroducing the rest of the cast who hadn't been present for the Kame House reunion. We actually see Krillin and Bulma track down and round up the rest, which is a lot of fun. But it also means the anime cuts out the scene where they locate and give out battle power numbers for them. Instead, the anime replaces it with a moment of checking the sea turtle's battle power. Aww. So they find Yamcha working as a professional baseball player, which is a Toriyama suggestion, and one of the coolest things ever. I mean, it's flipping brilliant. He's a martial artist with ridiculously superhuman levels of strength, but he needs money to survive. So, yeah, naturally he'd be a home run king. He even takes his Roga Fufu Ken stance at bat. It just seems like such a no-brainer to put those skills to good use. I wish more of the characters did stuff like this. However, Yamcha isn't terribly happy with the whole thing and wants to get back to martial arts. He even jumps at the chance to join a brawl on the field, which is equally hilarious. But I do like how, when he feels Kuririn's hand on his shoulder, he immediately recognizes this is someone who can take care of himself. The whole thing just feels cool and classic, the bored veteran dying for an opportunity to come out of retirement. Sadly, I don't feel the others quite measure up to the awesomeness of Yamcha playing baseball. It's nice to see Ten Shinhan, Chaozu, and Lunch sharing a house together, but it's all what you'd expect. Lunch is robbing things, Ten Shinhan and Chaozu are training. We don't really get anything new from them. It doesn't even feel like Ten Shinhan even wants Lunch there, so it's not as if some big character developments happened over the past 5 years. We do get to see bits of their training with God and Popo, and in sparring, Yajirobe bites Kuririn on the butt. He did this in the last arc too. Were they trying to make this into a running joke? That Yajirobe likes eating ass? Well, like the aborted running gag of Yamcha and company getting lost, it doesn't continue past its second appearance. But the main bit of filler concerning these guys is the episode with the Pendulum Room, which is freaking awesome. First of all, it looks a lot spookier than the time room Goku went into to meet with Taito. But they travel back to a past in their minds to fight a pair of surly Saiyans, and it doesn't end well, but humbles them quite a bit. It's very dark and tense, and I like how they're picked off one by one. Chaozu's taken out before the fighting even begins in earnest because nobody cares about Chaozu. Then Kuririn is taken out, and it comes down to Yamcha and Ten Shinhan, who were killed in fairly gruesome ways, despite using their best attacks. I like how it totally mixes up the order from how they'll be taken out in the real battle. And it makes sense that Yajirobe wouldn't even bother to participate. The only real dud of this bunch, I'd say, is an episode during Piccolo's and Gohan's training where it turns out that Goku's old space pod just happens to be in the vicinity of their training, is still powered up, and is emitting some kind of message that first turns Gohan rabid and regrows his tail, and then emits a projection to the moon that turns him into a great ape. This is stupid on so many levels. I mean, it's not Yamcha and Tambourine stupid, but it's still pretty stupid. First is the contrivance that they just happened to be within spitting distance of where Goku landed, and was found by the Elder Gohan, especially considering that the anime changes the training location to an island, and Goku's adult home to where he lived as a kid. The idea that it's been working all this time is ludicrous. How a full moon projection ties in with Vegeta's explanation of Brutes waves, well, it doesn't. And the fact that Piccolo blows the thing up ends up creating a huge plot hole since it's a space pod that's the foundation for the ship Goku uses to get the Namek. The only good thing about this is that apparently Piccolo knows the Bankoku Bikuri Sho, as he uses it against Gohan in what you could consider either an homage or ripoff of the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc. And yes, I mentioned Lunch earlier. It should come as no surprise that the anime included her, as they would have no reason to know that she wouldn't be coming back, especially considering Toriyama's promotional art and chapter title pages still included her. But it does look rather silly in retrospect that she keeps showing up in filler in this arc, when she doesn't show up in the manga story at all. I already mentioned her introduction, but afterwards, she follows Ten Shinhan to Carding Tower and tries to rob Upa and Bora. Upa's an interesting case since he's fairly grown up now, and he's one of the few instances in the anime where he's actually recast as a young man rather than keeping his original performer. Finally, during the fight with Vegeta, we see Lunch getting drunk in a bar, aware that Ten Shinhan is dead due to the fight being filmed by a camera crew in the anime, and is very depressed. That's kind of a sad note to leave her on, but that's the last time she's seen for quite a while. I mean, in the anime's continuity, does she ever know for sure that Ten Shinhan comes back to life? Although, would she have any reason to think he wouldn't come back? Honestly, I do wonder if they realized something was up by the time the fighting started, because Why wouldn't they have just put her with the rest of the gang at Kame House? See, while Yajirobe in the manga doesn't get involved in the battle until partway through Goku's fight with Vegeta, in the anime he actually shows up to the landing site just after the city is destroyed and uses his ki sensing abilities to send reporters in the direction of the battle, in return for a bunch of money. So in their attempts to get the scoop, they show up in their best helicopters and USS Enterprise shuttlecraft, which I covered in detail in one of my first Dragon Ball related videos. While most of them get blown up immediately for their troubles, some of them stay far enough away to get television coverage of the early parts of the fight, which the non-fighter characters watch from Kame House. Nappa kills the rest of the reporters during the 3-hour break, which makes that part of the story a little less pointless than it was in the manga. After a big gap without any coverage, Uranai Baba arrives and shows the rest on her crystal ball, so it gives the other characters a chance to react to the carnage, and it's often quite effective. It's heartbreaking seeing Puar suffer a complete collapse after Yamcha's death, although it is a bit annoying and all too typical that they keep him unconscious for the entire rest of the arc. I mean, Chi-Chi passes out too, but they still give her stuff to do later on. Funnily enough, Toriyama would reuse the same device years later with the Cell arc, although I actually feel it's done much better here. So, I technically include this as part of the Frieza arc, but we might as well talk about it now since I'm already on the subject. Since Bluma and the others already know a lot of the details about the fight in this version, it causes dialogue in the aftermath to have to be changed. In the original, Bluma assumes one of the 4 survivors is Piccolo, which would mean that the dead can still be brought back to life. When she finds out it's actually Yajirobe, she breaks down and cries, leading Yajirobe to wonder if they wish he died instead. However, in the anime, since she already saw segments of the fight after Piccolo's death, she couldn't be surprised by that reveal. So instead, she manages to keep her cool until Yajirobe shows up, at which point she chews him out for being cowardly and useless, saying that he should have died instead of Piccolo. And at this point, she breaks down sobbing. They both work in different ways, and I have to credit the anime for taking Yajirobe's line from the manga and actually giving it some serious dramatic weight. I mean, telling a guy he should have died instead of somebody else? That's pretty dark. And I can't think of a happier note to end on. I feel like I could go on in even greater detail, but you get the point. As much as I gush about it, it's not perfect. There are a few things I consider mistakes or missteps. The anime falls back on that annoying Dragon Ball crutch by randomly giving Vegeta telepathy for no reason. There's a bit where Gohan mistakenly calls a Masenko a Kamehameha, and even in an arc that has well-integrated filler, it still sometimes overreaches what the manga's going to allow it to do. I mean, as awesome as the Pendulum Room stuff is, the point was supposed to be to humble the characters in the face of science strength, and yet they all still show up completely lighthearted and overconfident and... yeah. But these are relative nitpicks compared to how good it is overall. The anime Saiyan arc lends the proceedings a strong 3-act type structure, with Goku struggles against Raditz setting the stage in the first act, followed by a large second act of minor adventures advancing character development, and concluding with the big fight that everything has been leading up to for so long. Everything just feels sharper here. It doesn't feel like a lot of filler later on, which is just boring and plays it way too safe. And it might be my imagination, but even the art and animation seem better in the Saiyan and early Frieza arcs, as if the new series launch somehow bumped the quality. I mean, sure, you have Studio Live making a mess of things once every several weeks, and believe you me when I say it took them forever to figure out how to draw a decent Vegeta. But overall, I'd say this is probably the best the anime looks. Even the coloring helps add to the sense of progression in the final fight. The manga shows it's just before noon when the Saiyans land, and it's nightfall when they pick up the bodies. One of the things I've liked about this fight is how draining it feels, like it's been a really long, traumatizing day for the characters. A sense of time does wonders for that. I give Toriyama full credit for the idea, but the anime picks up on that and carries it to fullest flower. So it's daytime and blue skies at the beginning. After the 3-hour break, everything is pinker to illustrate the sun getting lower in the sky. And by the time Goku and Vegeta are fighting, there's a greenish tint to what's left of the blue sky, indicating the arrival of dusk. Sadly, this is also when the first of our main 6 animation teams bows out, as freelancer Aoshima Katsumi, one of my favorite animation supervisors, supervises his last episodes in the Saiyan arc. He'd still stick around to work on the movies, and hey, that's a great consolation, right? Goku vs. Frieza might look like crap, but at least we got him to animate Slug. But on the bright side, he went out on a good one, episode 30. That's the one where Goku and Vegeta begin fighting, and that's an episode I always see people pointing to as an absolutely gorgeous specimen. And I agree. So when all is said and done, if I was scoring the anime arc separately from the manga, I might be persuaded to say the Saiyan arc would get the top score. So I hope you're enjoying Dragon Ball Dissection December so far. When we come back next week, it's what you've all been waiting for. The Cell arc finally begins. See you there. Oh, just don't tell the Power Scalers how easily Vegeta blows up a planet in filler. Riots will begin over this, I swear. Welcome to Dragon Ball Dissection December, the 7th consecutive iteration of my month-long Dragon Ball Dissection Marathon. I've received many comments asking about DBD TV, the branch of Dragon Ball Dissection, wherein we break away from the original manga and explore its animated adaptation. It only last made an appearance during Dragon Ball Dissection December 2 years ago. What can I say? The Cell arc took a long time to get through. Well, for those who have been clamoring, the wait is over, as this year's DBD December will be nothing but DBD TV. Allow me to set the stage, since it's been so long. When we last left off, the TV series had relaunched itself under a new name, Dragon Ball Z, while Toriyama shrugged and continued calling his series Dragon Ball. The animated Frieza arc aired from February 14th, 1990 to September 11th, 1991. What a pair of dates, huh? In terms of the manga run, that corresponds to Vegeta and Zarbon's first fight, all the way up to just before Goku starts fighting number 19. This is an arc I've been looking forward to covering for a very long time. Just as I feel the manga Frieza arc serves as a turning point for Dragon Ball, I believe the animated version serves a similar function. So why am I talking about this? Didn't I already cover that in the original Frieza arc videos? Well, in its case, it was a turning point for the storytelling. Here I feel it's a turning point for the production. Oh, and that reminds me, in case you're new here, this is not my review of the Frieza arc as a whole. I cover all of its narrative elements in my 13-part review of the manga. DBD TV is for anime exclusive elements. The beginning of the arc provides a good setting for filler. There's downtime with little action and a hospital setting to explore. The TV series decides to add a new character trait to Goku. While he can be regularly beaten and squeezed and crushed, what really flips his fear switch is universal health care. He's shown to be the biggest baby when his bandages are being changed, and then later on in Frieza's ship when he thinks Vegeta's going to use a needle on him. In the former case though, I can kinda see his point. His body has to be pretty tender, so it's a bit callous of the nurses to be so demeaning. A bit later on, there's a small subplot where Goku sneaks out of the hospital only to find out the hard way that he's not as fully recovered as he thought. In typical Toriyama fashion, the journey to Namek is a completely uneventful one. The trio leave Earth and arrive on Namek. Riveting. The animated series takes the opportunity to add in not one, but two mid-flight adventures. The beginning of the first one makes me think of Firefly, and how that show took the first opportunity to make fun of the fact that, due to the popularity of properties like Star Trek and Star Wars, people assume spaceships have guns on them. It's a cargo ship. Why would it have a gun on it? It's not like the UPS truck has a gun. Of all the spaceships that appear in Toriyama Akira's Dragon Ball series, not a single one is ever shown to possess firepower, including God's spaceship. But that doesn't stop this filler segment from giving it a big old laser cannon that doesn't appear to be anywhere. It just kind of emanates from somewhere. But they fight against a mirrored spaceship that draws them in and puts them through several goofy death traps before revealing that their captors are a bunch of orphaned children. Yeah, more of those. These children are refugees whose parents were killed in planet conquered by a force led by someone called Frieza. Obviously, our heroes have to earn their trust by saving their lives. And even more obviously, Bulma has to explore the underage day camp in her underwear. It does almost feel like something out of another series, some kind of space-based or mecha-based series. I really like it. And obviously it serves as foreshadowing as to what we can expect to find out in space. Now, I know I'm going against the consensus here, but I also really enjoy their next diversion. Yes, I'm a fan of fake Namek. Unlike the smooth landing they get in the manga, here the trio crash their spaceship and fall off a cliff. When they awaken, they're being tended to by two Namekians, Light-Chi and Zakuro. And that's right, Dragon Ball Super Broly, Dragon Ball Z beat you to a Light-Chi based character name decades before you came along, little missy. These two Namekians take them around the various dangers of the planet to find the Dragon Balls. However, when they approach the end of the quest, they find out that this was all an illusion. The so-called Namekians are telepathic aliens trapped on this dump of a planet who are keeping the trio occupied while they fix their ship for their own ends. I love this. Fake Namek is infinitely more interesting than real Namek, and its Dragon Ball hunt is much more of an adventure. Geez, look at all the different topography, the hazards. They fly on bird trees, they traverse an acidic lake, they enter active tornadoes, they confront a sleeping giant. The fake Namekians have more of a culture than the real ones do. Why do people hate this? This is fantastic, it's so much fun, it's action, it's adventure, it's everything I come to Dragon Ball to watch. And yes, it's obviously a complete waste of time like all filler is, but on its own it's a great little story. I even like that Kuririn gets suspicious a little too late, because he begins to notice inconsistencies in the geography. I love putting the characters through a mind screw thing, and while the solution is to punch things, there's more to it than that overall. It makes me wonder what 1990 Japanese viewers who had read the manga were thinking when this began airing. It's obviously not in any way compatible with the Namek in the manga. However, they do go out of their way to tip their hands on multiple occasions, such as showing the giant was made of stone. Even when they first land, Kuririn questions if this is really Namek, but they're unable to check the dragon radar before they fall off the cliff. But this seems like one of those serialized cheats because the planet looks like Namek even before they crash and before their minds have been read. The planet from space looks different than it actually is. For me, it was confusing because I kept missing the final episode of this mini-story. So I'd see them collecting the Dragon Balls, and then suddenly they were on a different-looking Namek with different-looking Dragon Balls. I assumed that the former had to be an illusion, but I guessed it was a trial the Namekians forced them to undergo to prove their worthiness. A minor thing I've always enjoyed about the 3 stops the characters make is that the TV series has it so that they gradually shift into their final outfits. When they leave, Bluma is in her spacesuit, Kuririn is in his casual clothes, and Gohan in, that. In space, Bluma is in her underwear, and Gohan is changed into his Piccolo outfit. And they're in that configuration for the orphans. Kuririn even gets a different Kame hat that gets lost during that adventure. For the fake Namek stuff, Bluma has changed into her final outfit, and then when they get to real Namek, Kuririn is changed into his Kame Dogi. I don't know why that's always stood out to me, but I like how Toei has them slowly morph into their final looks one by one. It further assists in giving each section its own identity. Another commonly agreed upon stinker that I like is, yes, Bluma and the Crab. Boy, I really can feel your estimation of my judgment lowering. I'm so glad Bluma actually gets something to do around here, with a minor adventure breaking up all the glossed over traveling. One that plays to her strengths and, as I tend to like, favors brains over brawn. Is she in her most caricatured, whiny, and materialistic Toei version of herself? Oh, definitely. I practically want to smack her upside the head when she's too afraid of getting wet to rescue the Dragon Ball when it's 3 feet away from her. It didn't bother you when you were a teenager. I want to again when she later decides to momentarily abandon the Dragon Ball in favor of a giant pearl. But since all of her suffering after that is her having to atone for her own idiocy, I'm overall okay with it. I'm just not sure how a giant sea monster got that close to the shallow water to accidentally scoop up the Dragon Ball in the first place. Anyway, once the Dragon Ball disappears, Bluma has to use her capsule collection to go after it, leading to a lot of danger and cliffhanger-esque close calls. She finally finds it on the back of a giant crab that appears to have thousands of Dragon Balls. However, it turns out they're eggs. When Bluma returns with the Dragon Ball, she's immediately captured by 2 of Frieza's men, Raspberry and Bullberry. That's right, Dragon Ball Super Broly, Dragon Ball Z beat you to a blueberry-based character name decades before you came along, little missy. Having to think on her feet, she convinces them that she knows where the other Dragon Balls are, and that they should make a wish for themselves rather than hand them over to Frieza. So she leads them back to the crab so they can fall for the same fake Dragon Ball she did, and then she leaves them to their fate with the Mother Crab. Just like with Fake Namek, I don't get why this is so hated. Bulma is wasted in this arc, so I greatly appreciate them giving her something to do that allows her to be resourceful. It is a bit lucky she stumbles upon the crab again. Quite frankly, I don't even know if it's the same crab since those eggs hatched on her first trip. If she found another mother crab in the same area, I suppose that is stretching credulity. But how about some honest-to-goodness mistakes? The TV series makes a pretty big one when they pad out the first fight between Zarbon and Vegeta. In the manga, just before Zarbon defeats him, he rubs in how screwed Vegeta is by revealing that Frieza can also transform, which is what allows Vegeta to later blow the lid off of that surprise. But the way the anime restructures the fight doesn't leave room for any dialogue, so that pertinent piece of information is left out and never stated. So when Vegeta brings it up anyway, it left me very confused as a kid. It's not a huge plot hole since Zarbon could have told Vegeta at any other point they'd known each other, but it's definitely missing the impact it has in the manga. Another mistake is when the anime valiantly attempts to add something, anything to Gerdo's character so that he's not a complete non-entity. They try to build up antagonism towards Vegeta by showing a flashback of Vegeta abusing him in the past. However, Vegeta is shown to look exactly as he does in this arc. He's in his Frieza arc armor and he doesn't have a tail. Another interesting Gerdo change is one that is kinda subtle, and you might miss it if you aren't paying too much attention. In fact, coming to the manga only after I'd seen the TV series, it's something I didn't notice until someone pointed it out to me. You might remember that Gerdo can only stop time for as long as he holds his breath. That's never established in the manga. There, he can stop time until he can't anymore. It looks like it wears him out, so if you're already expecting him to be out of breath, it's easy to see how you'd interpret it that he had been holding his breath. But he very clearly talks out loud on multiple occasions while he's freezing time. I much prefer the animated version giving him a concrete limitation to his power. But before I move on from Gerdo entirely, the TV series completely reinterprets his death. In the original, Vegeta appears behind him and chops his head straight off with his bare hand. With his gloved hand. But the animated version, I guess, wanted to go for a more dramatic reveal. So instead, a thin ki blast goes through Gerdo's head, which was revealed to have been from Vegeta. Like, for instance, Goku's Super Saiyan transformation, the manga prefers to present things in a shocking and abrupt manner. The animated series opts for drawn out and dramatic, but I think that plays to the strengths of each medium. This is less of a mistake or omission than it is a simple change. But at this point, under Morishita and Koyama, changes from the manga in general were getting rarer and rarer. As I talked about in previous DVD TV episodes, that appears to be part of the reason why Toriyama's editor Torishima had insisted on a changing of the guard, so that Dragon Ball Z adhered much closer to Dragon Ball than Dragon Ball had adhered to Dragon Ball. But this is still relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. This isn't completely rewriting the Cho Shinsui. In the manga, a minor character, fan favorite game changer named Apul, named after the apple, appears a few times, both to let Frieza know about Vegeta destroying a village, and then to be killed by Vegeta. But in the TV version, it's a similar looking palette swap with Fangs named Orin, after the orange, who delivers the bad news about the village. But Frieza is certainly one to shoot the messenger, which leads to Apul showing up and also dying. It's a bit like how the Saiyan arc splits up the Bubbles training into two separate characters, if Kaio and Goku had murdered them at the end. But I also remember animated Frieza killing at least another one of his own henchmen. Ginyu seemingly kills at least one, and then Vegeta comes back to the ship and goes on a killing spree of the rest of Frieza's henchmen. Obviously that last one wouldn't count, but when I was first watching these episodes before I read the manga, it made me wonder why some of these guys don't come back to life when the wishes are made with the Dragon Balls. I expected Goku should meet a little resistance when he's running around Frieza's ship. It does give the overall impression that manga Frieza prepared rather haphazardly for this trip, bringing only the bare minimum of people with him, most of whom seem to have died in that one village. Meanwhile, animated Frieza brought a huge contingent along with him. Although because of that, I have a much easier time believing that manga Frieza ran through his supply of scouters so quickly. Another minor change has Dodoria killing Cargo instead of Frieza handling it directly. And one more change has Frieza aiming for Goku, only to have Piccolo take the bullet rather than Frieza shooting Piccolo directly. The interesting thing here is that it adapts a panel of the manga out of order to complete the transformation. In the manga, this shows Piccolo falling in front of Goku after he's been shot. In the anime, the same setup is Piccolo pushing Goku out of the way before he's been shot. It doesn't really fit in the TV series though, as it's obvious Frieza's picking off Goku's friends to cause him as much pain as possible, so why would he open by trying to kill Goku? Similar to his Serpentine Road filler experiences, Goku is granted a couple of adventures in space. The first is when damage to the hull of his ship causes it to drift off course into the path of a star, and while Dr. Brief sends Goku out to repair the damage, glue is gonna glue and Goku is gonna Goku. Interestingly enough, this bit of filler introduces the idea that Dr. Brief has installed a closed-circuit television in the ship with which to communicate with Goku. Here it looks like a standard CRT mounted in a standard 90s rack. Later on, when Gohan has taken the injured Piccolo back to the ship, the television makes another appearance, only now it's a futuristic ovular flat screen. I guess the spaceship evolves over time. The animated series also provides an impetus for Goku to begin training in 100 times gravity. Apparently that level far exceeds what Dr. Brief ever intended Goku to use, but he programmed it that way anyway because... mad science. Due to a weird magnetic storm, the device kicks into high gear without Goku's knowledge, and he's forced to endure the deadly gravity until he passes through the storm. It's a pretty intense episode with appropriately ambient lighting, realistic danger and injuries, and a clever solution. And after surviving being stuck upside down for so long, Goku decides to continue training in 100 times gravity. Another bit of filler that I always really enjoyed was adding in some details to Kaio's training of Piccolo and the others, which isn't originally seen at all outside of a chapter title page. And since none of that training ever really matters, I suppose that's understandable. But I do enjoy seeing them endure the trials Goku had. It is hilarious watching Yamcha and Chaozu coach Ten Shinhan to be able to make a joke, something he is simply not capable of doing. And like a lot of filler up to this point has been good with, it shows the bond between these characters, and more importantly, the lack of bond with Piccolo, who wants nothing to do with any of this. He considers Kaio's training methods beneath him, and demonstrates so by effortlessly retrieving bubbles despite not having permission to train, due to his lack of willingness to make Kaio laugh, only to do so by accident. Obviously most of this we've seen before with Goku, but it takes on a new dynamic with the interplay between friends and rivals. Once they make it through the Bubbles and Gregory stuff, they spar. And this is a fairly predictable character turn. Piccolo volunteers to go against all three of them because he still thinks Kaio's training is pointless, only to find out he's in a bit over his head and gain new respect, yada yada yada. It's very satisfying, but it would be much more so if these characters ever had any real payoff for these gains or these relationships. Something interesting though is that Chaozu does take some heavy hits during this, only for Kaio to inform him that since he's already dead, injuries don't last. This has always made sense to me, but much later on, the Majin Buu arc seems to contradict this by establishing that you can die again after you die. That story has its own reasons for doing that, which I understand, but I much prefer this. The afterlife is already far too similar to living already. But given that, I guess it's a good thing Chaozu doesn't go through with the seeming use of self-destruct against Piccolo, because that would have been awkward. A tiny insignificant thing that tickles me is that in the episode leading into the one where Piccolo and the others appear on Kaio's, Gohan ends the preview by singing a tiny bit of Piccolo-san Daisuki, the insert song he sings from Dragon Ball Z Movie 2, The World's Strongest Guy. That movie had seen release about 2 months before the episode aired. It's a cute little movie nod that doesn't in any way affect continuity, unlike what we'll see after we finish our look at this arc, which won't be today. So far, I've mostly focused on filler material and primarily from the first half of the arc, but next time we're going to explore those production changes I talked about. Welcome back to Week 2 of Dragon Ball Dissection December, the Dragon Ball Dissection month-long marathon. Today we're here to continue our look at the television adaptation of the Frieza arc. Up until now, I've primarily focused on the first half of this arc. If you watched my recent video on Season 3 of American DBZ, you'll know that for myself, despite not having watched the dub in years, it's still difficult for me not to see a hard dividing line in the middle of the Frieza arc. And while that shift in dub elements, the change in voices and music for example, contributes significantly to that, the show itself does change too. It's that turning point I referred to last time. See, even when I was 13, I knew that the show was being dubbed from Japanese, and that this break was nothing more than a pause in the dubbing of an already existing show, not an actual production gap. However, despite that, when I tuned into Season 3, I almost convinced myself there had actually been a break in the creation of the show. The art, the animation, the coloring, the filler, it all suffered a huge drop in quality, and that happened to almost exactly coincide with the shift between US Seasons 2 and 3. Now that I know all the different animation studios and have a keener eye for this sort of thing, I can see the division is not nearly as clear-cut as I thought then. There were plenty of bad-looking episodes before, and many good-looking episodes after. But I don't think I was terribly off the mark. I don't claim to be an expert when it comes to the production of Dragon Ball. In the grand scheme of things, there's not a whole lot of behind-the-scenes info we know. And I certainly don't claim to be an expert when it comes to the field of animation. The following are simply my observations and the conclusions I have drawn from them. Over the years, I have briefly introduced you to the various animation studios responsible for Dragon Ball. For most of that run up until now, there were 6 regular teams: Studio Junio, Last House, Shindo Pro, Seigasha, Studio Live, and the unnamed team led by freelancer Aoshima Katsumi. That generally meant a 6-episode rotation. In other words, each studio had about 6 weeks in between each of their episodes airing. As I mentioned last time in the Saiyan arc, after episode 30, Aoshima stopped working on episodes and began drawing exclusively for the movies, leaving the show with 5 teams by the beginning of the Frieza arc. 1990, which is when the Frieza arc started airing, introduced the trend of releasing not 1 but 2 Dragon Ball Z movies every single year. I've already observed that starting in Dragon Ball Z, most of the new music Kikuchi Shunsuke composed was created for the movies and simply recycled into the series. He was being called on to score 2 movies a year. I feel something similar happened to the animators. A lot of the series animators worked on the movies. It certainly appears to me as though the extra workload pulled focus away from animating the series well to animating the movies well. Studio Junio, which in my opinion was responsible for some of the highest quality episodes, was supervised by Maeda Minoru. He was also the series' character designer, and he was credited as animation supervisor for all 4 movies released during this arc, which I have to imagine caused him to be much busier. Let me give you an example here. Studio Junio worked on episode 48. They wouldn't do an episode again until 70. In fact, out of the 72 regular episodes of this arc, Studio Junio only animated 7 of them. As a point of comparison, the notoriously bad Studio Live, whose supervisor also drew key animation for certain movies, animated 14 episodes. Let's also remember that the Bardock special aired as a double-length episode during this arc, which also required extra care. But at least that pushed back production of the next regular episode by an extra week. Toei Animation would pick up some of the slack and animate a few episodes in-house. Their fantastic Nakatsuru Katsuyoshi would supervise the animation on the Bardock special. But essentially by the middle of the Frieza arc, the main studios had gone from a 6-episode rotation to a 4-episode rotation. Aoshima was gone from the series, Studio Junio largely was. That left Studio Live, Last House, Shindo Pro, and Seigasha to do their work in 2/3 of the time they were used to having. I don't have to be an expert in animation to wager that that probably has a lot to do with the drastic dip in quality we get here. As if that wasn't enough, right around that coincidental Season 2, Season 3 break, which again only applies to the American version, not to the actual production of the show, Takeuchi Tomekichi stepped down as animation supervisor for Seigasha. For the rest of the series, Shimanuki Masahiro and Hisada Kazuya would alternate supervising duties for that studio. And while ultimately Segasha came out the other side of this looking, in my opinion, better than ever, there were some definite growing pains that had to be worked out at this critical juncture. I mean, geez, look at episode 87. It's a fairly ambitious looking episode, but I don't understand how you can consistently draw Goku so wrong. And wouldn't you know it, episode 68, which comprised a decent chunk of the first episode of US Season 3, was the first Segasha episode supervised by Shimanuki instead of Takeuchi. And the character models really do look off. 13-year-old me can take comfort in that fact. You weren't crazy, you really did notice something. Shindo Pro and Last House, I would say, both had difficulties adapting to the angular shift in Toriyama's art, particularly the latter. Their softer, less detailed style just does not mesh well with these designs. This is where Last House starts to go downhill, but it doesn't really reach its nadir until after the Frieza arc, so I'll focus on them in later videos. While Shindo Pro still holds up pretty well, I feel they somewhat overcompensate on the angular thing, leading to the nickname I used to hear them being called on the internet, the Evil Eye Studio. For their lowlights, I'm particularly reminded of episode 73, which isn't a bad looking episode, but it flat out reuses whole sections of animation. Studio Live generally remains as bad as it ever was. However, I think it's the only studio that starts to show any real improvement. While Ebisawa Yukio continues to supervise the studio, you can really easily tell the difference between sections he animated and sections drawn by his other key animators. When the chins and shoulder pads and boots stop looking ridiculously pointy, you know it's not Ebisawa drawing it. And while it's still not my favorite style, I can much more easily tolerate Studio Live during these cuts. Suffice it to say, I think pretty much every studio suffered at this point, and it really shows. It's so sad because, as I said last time, I thought the quality really jumped when they relaunched the series. Everyone was putting in their A-games. But by 1991, even when episodes were drawn okay, there was a rough, unpolished look to some of them. I hate to sound cynical, but it feels like they knew what they had. The Frieza arc was when the Dragon Ball manga was most popular. They wanted to capitalize and crank out as much Dragon Ball Z material as they could. It didn't matter that they were spreading their resources thin on non-serialized movies. The show was just a merchandise commercial. It was still going to be popular even if the art and animation quality took a nosedive, because the real money was in ticket sales, right? That said, there is one section of the latter half of the Frieza arc that looks exceptionally good, better than the rest of the series. And that's not because of what's drawn, but how it's presented. For whatever reason, a handful of episodes, 73 to 80 I believe, were shot on 35mm film. Normally, Dragon Ball was filmed on smaller 16mm, and the bump in resolution resulted in those episodes looking remarkably sharper, and unless I'm mistaken, its colors more vibrant. But now back to my ranting. The art taking a significant hit was bad enough, but this is also where the pacing becomes unbearable. To an extent, I can understand. Remember, the show always had to stay behind the manga. That's what it was adapting. And over time, that buffer room had dwindled. Let's break this down for a second. When the Dragon Ball animated series began, the manga had a head start of 63 chapters, or about a year and 3 months. Skipping ahead to the beginning of the TV Piccolo arc, that lead had been cut in half to 28 chapters, or 7 months. Jumping once more to the episode in which Goku becomes a Super Saiyan, that had dwindled to a paltry 11 chapters, less than 4 months between page and screen. I remember starting DBD TV back in 2014, and following along with the manga for the first time, it amazed me in hindsight how quickly they were pacing everything, adapting multiple chapters in a single episode, and how much that would change in a few short years. Still, it's hard to blame them to an extent. In 1986, they had no idea how long this series would run. I maintain Dragon Ball fundamentally changed in the Frieza arc, and in a way that made it more difficult for adaptation to television. This was the longest arc Dragon Ball had ever done up to this point. Unlike the Saiyan arc, there was no big built-in gap for storytelling with a natural character arc to develop, and opportunities to reintroduce large portions of the cast. The story just kept running and running and running with fewer and fewer opportunities for organic expansion of the story. The focus fully turned to months upon months of non-stop fighting and transformations. A 15-page manga chapter is usually typically less material than would fill a half-hour block of television. but an entire chapter that's nothing but fighting can be set to animation that takes up a matter of seconds. And once the fighting started, there were fewer opportunities to cut away to other things. For example, they would always use natural breaks in the story to create their own filler storylines, but you can't really do that in the middle of a continuous fight in the middle of a very long story arc. Even long tournaments had gaps in between matches that offered opportunities for new material. Here, they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. They weren't in a position where they could stop bleeding material to adapt, but they couldn't let themselves get any closer to the manga than they already were. So by the late Frieza arc, chapters were almost literally being adapted at a 1-to-1 ratio. As in, one chapter would comprise one episode, no matter how little material it provided. They did their best with a handful of small story cutaways. It couldn't be anything significant enough that it would draw focus from the real story for too long. We get Captain Ginyu swapping bodies with Bluma, Yamcha and the others fighting the dead Ginyu members on Kaio's world, and Chi-Chi's futile attempts to get to planet Namek herself across 2 different spaceships. Oh, I suppose I should mention that results in manga cutaways to Chi-Chi and Yajirobe and their own environs being dropped as they're hanging out at Capsule Corporation in the TV series. But yeah, that last one's the only one I don't particularly care for. If you can't get enough of Toei's Chi-Chi bitching everyone out for episode upon episode in a storyline that ultimately goes nowhere, this is what you've been waiting for. In fact, due to her casting change happening at around this time, you get to hear both Sho Mayumi and Watanabe Naoko's interpretations of Chi-Chi acting insufferably towards Bluma's family. At least the other 2 subplots have some kind of resolution and victory. Well, there is one big payoff for it I'll get to later. Ultimately though, it's one gag as Chi-Chi chewing out Dr. Brief for not getting the ship ready quickly enough. I don't think these 2 characters ever interact in the manga, come to think of it. All the other characters stand around in the background. I do have a soft spot for the Ginyu at Kaio's. It makes no sense given that someone else was putting in filler cutaways of their dead bodies on Namek. You know, those bodies they simultaneously have in the afterlife. But it is nice to see these guys win a fight. I don't care too much about the supposed power scaling problem. My only complaint is how uncreative it is. I mean, you have the 2 strongest telekinetic fighters in the universe squaring off against each other, and what do the genius writers have them do? Headbutt each other. That was the only thing you could think to have Chaozu do? You give Chaozu a fight, and that's the only thing you could think to have him do. You bring back Gerdo, and he only uses his telekinesis to throw a tree at Kaio's house? You bring back Gerdo, and you don't even have him freeze time? Ah! While Captain Ginyu in Bluma's body is a fun enough diversion that makes further use of existing characters who aren't doing anything, it does feel like quintessential filler. Eventually this pair makes their way to the fight. Piccolo, Gohan, and Kuririn become involved, the situation is resolved, and immediately the force of the fight between Goku and Frieza blows the 2 of them and only the 2 of them away, and none of the other characters care in the slightest or ever mention this again. Remember how in the 22nd Budokai, the TV series adds in all the absent characters as spectators? This feels like the exact opposite, like it was made to be cut out of the show as seamlessly as possible. Yet for some reason, years later, Dragon Ball Kai keeps this. Oh, but I guess it's important because the Ginyu Frog ends up on Earth and that becomes relevant again 24 years later in some crappy revival series. But I will take any number of cutaway filler plots to the show just dragging out the manga storyline. This content is stretched thinner than pantyhose over a sumo wrestler. There is taking time to set a tone, and then there's just killing time. Characters stare at each other. Kaio overexposits to Yamcha, Tenshinhan, and Chaozu. There is a full fight flashback at one point. They flash back to stuff we just saw. You're not going to believe this, but even the recaps get into this. The ironic part is that if this took place in the first Dragon Ball TV series, it might not have been as noticeable because there was no standard recap music. Dragon Ball Z introduced that. It's a very easy to follow Chala Head Chala based melody. In early episodes, the recap is pretty short, usually as long as the piece of music and in some cases even shorter. As a point of reference, the full piece of music runs under 1 minute and 15 seconds. But starting here, you will be lucky to ever hear that piece of music without enduring sections of it looping, often multiple times. Yes, they had to resort to padding out the recaps to fill time. I timed at least one recap in this arc running longer than 3 minutes. That means if you were watching this as a kid in Japan, you'd have to sit through the nearly 2-minute long opening animation, the first commercial break, and then 3 minutes of recap just to get to the episode itself. I never again want to hear anyone complain my intros are too long. Thankfully, the next episode previews stayed locked at 30 seconds, otherwise I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the actual episodes ended up being reduced to about 12 minutes long. This all culminates in Frieza's declaration of 5 minutes until Namek explodes, stretching itself out to a ludicrous 10 episodes. We're talking hours of your life here. It's ridiculous, and it forever cemented Dragon Ball Z's reputation as Drag On Ball because it does nothing but drag on and on. I sympathize with the situation they were in, but it is a pejorative that is well deserved here. Unlike a lot of people I hear from nowadays, I certainly don't think it ever gets to the point of being unwatchable. After all, I've watched it many times. That said, between the poor pacing and the declining animation quality, Dragon Ball Z reaches its absolute lowest point in the second half of the Frieza arc. Whew, I can't believe I managed to devote an entire episode to that. Yet I still have more to say in regards to the Frieza arc. I should have called this year's batch of episodes Frieza Dissection December. Check back next week as we continue our look at TV Frieza. And if you can't wait that long, it'll be waiting for you on Patreon.
Okay, so maybe I've been putting off making this video for a little too long. Well, over the last couple of months, I've been exploring and watching through the catalogue of Dragon Ball films, most of which I've never seen. I started out by watching the most recommended by you guys, then I tackled the second most recommended, and then I forced myself through the least popular among them. But today I'm going to be forcing myself through what I expect to be the worst session of movie watching I've ever experienced. Why do I think this? Well, the movies that receive the most and least votes do so for a reason. People either hate them or love them. Either way, there's something to be gained either through admiration or at the very least a bit of humor poking fun at it. But when something is in the middle, it can be very boring. So, I have 5 more left to cover. Well, technically I have 6, but I don't want to watch another old Dragon Ball movie that recaps moments around early tournament arcs. Tao does shoot Arale with a Dodon Ray though. Anyway, we have 5 movies left, and those films are Tree of Might, Lord Slug, The Return of Cooler, Super Android 13, and Broly's Second Coming. I haven't seen any of these films, and to kick things off, we're diving straight into The Tree of Might. Okay, so not only have I never seen this film, but I also have no idea what it's even about. I knew it had Turles in it, but I had no idea what part he even played. And so the story itself begins with a pod landing on Earth while the gang, excluding Goku, is camping in the forest. This forest suddenly bursts into flames. Some of the colors and visuals with Gohan and Krillin tackling the burning woodland are actually very pretty. With the Inferno eventually having come under control, the forest itself is left in ashes, leaving all the native creatures without a place to live. And thus, the quest for the Dragon Balls begins. Cue theme music. And so, naturally, this film is pretty much a quest to find all 7 Dragon Ball... Oh wait, no, it's not. The title sequence ends and Shenron is here. Ooh, and it's that shot from the old opening on Toonami. The vast majority of the first 15 minutes isn't important, and Icarus for the most part gets way too much screen time that culminates in what is eventually a throwaway scene towards the end. Other than that, the last 75% of the film is actually handled really, really well. If you're a fan of Goku wrecking shop, then you'll love the middle bit that boasts some of the best animation this era of Dragon Ball has to offer. Seriously, it's utterly gorgeous. Additionally, and somewhat surprisingly, there's a pretty hefty environmental message throughout that works for the most part. The Z Warriors get punched, and Turles is actually much better and much more fun to watch in this movie than I anticipated. I like the concept of the tree that sucks the life out of the planet. It makes for a great visual and a fitting way to cap off the film with a bang. Using the life energy of the tree itself against Turles and the tree was a clever idea and one I didn't see coming. The film has its drawbacks, like the first 15 minutes and King Kai only appearing to facilitate exposition dumps, but the vast majority majority of the film is actually quite fun. Next. This film I haven't seen, but I did watch the Team 4-star version and it's pretty much the same story for the most part, all the while being less than half the runtime. How is this possible? Well, the movie just sort of drags its feet with the forward progression of the story a bit here and there. And everywhere. There are some truly fun action sequences in the first half with Gohan, Krillin, Piccolo, and even Roshi. But in order to get to those moments, there's tons of unnecessary talking, standing around, doing nothing, and action with no resolution. The story so far is pretty sound and perfectly serviceable, but the material is better suited to a 30-minute special than a 45-minute feature. The big Getty star is the most MacGuffin thing I've heard in all of Dragon Ball so far. I don't care about it even slightly, and it comes out of nowhere to make the plot possible. The great aspects of this film are clear as day. Vegeta's save for Goku during the initial phase of the Cooler fight is a highlight for certain. However, how he got to the planet that was made to be intentionally difficult to find is left unexplained, which always bothered me. And that's pretty much this movie in a nutshell. Things sort of happen that wouldn't normally make sense just to facilitate a cool shot, animation sequence, or reveal. And there are some awesome shots in this film, some of my favorites in fact. A wounded Goku and Vegeta standing defiantly against an army of coolers is a sweet shot, and it's one Toyotaro took inspiration from for his manga during the Goku Black arc. I would imagine those of you that enjoy Dragon Ball for the fights and not the story will thoroughly enjoy this. And even those of you that like the banter between Vegeta and Goku have something to enjoy here. As for the story, it's pretty unremarkable overall, with an ending that screams, "We didn't know how to end this, so Goku and Vegeta just get super strong and win inexplicably." And they even had senzu beans. What? I watched these movies one after the other, and at this stage in watching these films, I became incredibly jaded. Super jaded. Not necessarily because these movies are doing anything terribly wrong, but because they are all doing the same for the most part. All of them follow this basic structure. Cold open with the gang enjoying normal things, injecting bits of comedy. The bad guy shows up and they fight for the vast majority with the goal of stopping them. They keep fighting until they fail. Then Goku pulls through at the end to win the day inexplicably. The story isn't necessarily there to be interesting or captivating, but to act as a vehicle for the action to take place. It's action over story, and honestly, I'm sick of it. Now, this film has some great visuals. The character designs are quirky, and I really like how they reanimated Android 17 eliminating Dr. Gero at the very beginning. But when you catch on to how these films are structured, which isn't difficult, they become very slow and boring to watch. There's no emotional through line to keep tabs with and to explore. It's punch punch, shout shout, repeat until over. Dragon Ball sort of has this reputation for being the punch kick shout anime, and while the action is a large part of the series, it's by no means ever been the focus of it. The action happens, but the story has always been first. They tell a story through the fighting. They don't just have a story so that they can fight. And that is the key difference. The Super Android 13 film itself has terrific backgrounds and colors going its way, and the art from this era is always reliable. But the story has nothing to say. It might as well be a sequence of clips that on their own look great and are cool, but offer nothing else. Once again, because the story has no emotional through line, it has to figure out a way for Goku to super punch the bad guy away at the end. That really screams Deus Ex Machina. From a visual front, it's up there with the standard classic Dragon Ball has always enjoyed, but in terms of story, it offers nothing. Please Lord, let this next one have a story. I immediately hate it. This Gohan whistling thing makes me so uncomfortable. For some reason, more so than it does Piccolo. The tune is unbearable to me. Moving swiftly on, this is another one of those Dragon Ball movies I have no idea about or what the story even is. So a massive comet expected to crash on Earth explodes near it instead, releasing a spaceship that lands on the planet. Within this ship, you guessed it, is none other than the titular Lord Slug and his henchmen looking to, you guessed it, gather the Earth's Dragon Balls to, you guessed it, grant Lord Slug immortality. Oh wait, no, he wants to be young. Sort of a waste, but Yeah, whatever. It's your wish. His primary goal for Earth is to convert it into a ship or vehicle to cruise across the universe or something. What's important is that he's doing bad things to the Earth, and boy howdy does Goku and co want to stop him. Some of the henchmen Piccolo and Gohan face have some pretty interesting and somewhat gross abilities, so that's always fun. Nevertheless, Goku shows up to make the save for Piccolo and Gohan that leads to the henchmen's ultimate defeat in a style that is very similar to how he arrived and defeated the Ginyu Force on Namek. Definitely not a coincidence. Most of these films do these things like this. And with the henchmen out of the way, it's time for the main course. It's slug time. The fight, honestly, early on is very standard. Krillin gets decked in one punch and Goku takes the beating for the bones of 10 minutes until this happens. Goku ends up doing this sort of Super Saiyan but not really kind of thing. It's a really cool scene and demonstration of the form, except the hair is the wrong color. I don't know enough about the scene and its production, but I've heard that this was a mistake by the art department and this was supposed to be the first Super Saiyan demonstration but fell short as a result of the color mishap. This could be untrue. I am by no means an official source. I haven't fact-checked this, but that's just something that I've heard. It's a rumor. Or maybe it's true, I don't know. Regardless, it turns out that Slug is a Namekian, which explains why he knows about the Dragon Balls and he begins to grow in size, much like Piccolo did during the Tenkaichi Budokai. There's some interesting shots of Goku running and evading the giant hands of Slug, with some interesting action sequences from Piccolo himself also. They then tank the entire film by making it such that Gohan's whistling is the kryptonite to the Namekian people. Piccolo rips his ears off and Gohan weakens Slug through his terrible whistling. Now, having been weakened, Goku gives Lord Slug the old wham bam thank you ma'am, sending him away with a spirit bomb. Overall, the movie is okay. It's very formulaic with some cool visual moments. The ending is honestly terrible due to there being primarily no emotional through line. Shocking, I know. And now it's time for that movie I've been dreading to review this entire time. Broly Second Coming is the most bonkers film I've ever seen released for Dragon Ball, bar none. And I've seen Hitler resurrected from the dead while Goku and Vegeta try to fix the plumbing in Otherworld. At the end of the first Broly film, we are expected to believe that not only did Broly land in ice, or crystal, that regardless of what it is, should have no oxygen for him to breathe and thus should have killed him there and then. But that's not where this crazy train of coincidence ends. He also landed on Earth, of all places, coincidentally residing in the lake that also happens to be where a beast terrorizes a small village in the middle of nowhere, a place that Videl, Goten, and Trunks happen to find themselves sitting on top of, all the while managing to make the only noise that could wake up this comatose Broly. This is the single most tragic opening I've ever seen in my life, and then this happens. What is happening? What is happening in this movie? It's like a funhouse mirror. Nothing is the way that you think it should be. I like that Videl has a large role to play in this film, but she hasn't been set up to survive a single shot from the character that did this to Vegeta in the last one. Gohan senses a disturbance in the force and begins racing towards the location of all the action, arriving just in the nick of time to make the save on Goten and Trunks. And this is honestly the best part of the film for me. Seeing Gohan acting assertively and assuming responsibility for everyone taking the lead against Broly, but truly that's not nearly enough to make this even a passable film for me. Suffering similar issues other films in this series have had to an absurd degree. This film takes so many liberties with its storytelling in order to exclusively create snapshot moments that are cool in isolation, but when you stop to think about it, makes zero sense. For instance, this shot of Goten, Gohan, and Goku firing a family Kamehameha was awesome. It's a shot that is shared throughout the internet and it's one I am very familiar with. Now, having seen it, I can't help but laugh at it. The Dragon Balls fall out of a bag, Shenron summons himself, and Goku is wished back by what is later explained as the dragon himself helping out Goku. I've heard people say that Goten makes the wish, but he really doesn't. He doesn't say a single word. Any monologue that happens with Goten happens in his head, and you can't make a wish with what you're thinking. Otherwise, what would have been the point of the very first wish in all of Dragon Ball where Oolong wished for panties? I'm sure no one else was thinking that. It's always been very clearly a first come first serve audible request to the dragon from you, the person making the wish. And so, as Goku makes his way up to his two sons, I am laughing at how utterly ridiculous this entire thing is. Why not have Videl use the balls? She was the one that wanted to see them in action in the first place, and it would have given her a unique and worthwhile use in the film. What in the world were they thinking? Between this and BoJack Unbound's surprise Goku save, the endings these films receive are some of the worst Deus Ex Machina finishes I have ever sat through. This movie had some great ideas for visuals, but cared less about the story than pretty much all of the others. Look, I love Dragon Ball's big moments as much as the next guy. My favorite happens to be, right now, the Kaioken times 20 on Namek. But that moment is so great because of everything that went into making it what it was. In isolation, as a vapid, meaningless action sequence, it loses a ton of its luster for me. And the same can be said for why the Gohan Super Saiyan 2 transformation was so successful. It's not just successful because it looks cool, it's successful because of what it means. It meant something. This Broly film didn't pay enough attention or give enough care to what ultimately became a very bad script. A script that could be made infinitely better with a few minor changes here and there without yet again relying on the old reliable, or as Broly might put it, Kakarot, 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 Kakarot. My journey through these films have been much more enjoyable than what this video might have led you to believe. There were some pleasant surprises earlier in this series, but if I'm being perfectly honest, the vast majority followed the exact same formulaic structure that honestly bores me to death. And don't get me wrong, I'm by no means saying that you can't enjoy these. As I said earlier, if you're just in this for the action, it's there. Just don't expect anything in the realm of story for the vast majority of these. I've made a list of these films from best to worst as my personal ranking and posted it on my Twitter if you want to check that out, and maybe give me a follow. I'm on there at TotallyNotMark. Lots of the concepts I employ for videos come from your input on Twitter, and make sure to subscribe for more videos on YouTube too. But that'll do it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. Hello and welcome to Hot Take, the show where I take a controversial stance and try to justify it. Today I wanted to talk about the old
starting now on the